Hi guys. Imagine stepping into a smoky, candlelit hall filled with boisterous laughter, questionable ale, and simple pottage soups for hungry patrons. We'll explore the architecture, the rough clientele, and makeshift sleeping quarters in the loft above. Stick around to discover what life was like when inns doubled as social hubs, gambling dens, and courtroom arenas. If you enjoy this trip back in time, subscribe and hit that like button. Let me know in the comments which medieval food or drink you'd try. Indeed, when you push open the door of a medieval tavern, a wave of heat washes over you as if the building itself is alive with energy. Candles fixed into wooden brackets cast uneven pools of light across planks that serve as the floor, and plaster walls are stained with years of soot. The air is thick with smoke from the hearth, spiced by spilled ale and roasting meat. At the center of this bustling scene, a long scarred table stretches under a row of low-hanging lanterns, whose glass faces are clouded with grime. The table bears the carvings of travelers on long journeys. Around it, men and women of different stations lean in to speak over the din. Peasants in simple tunics converse with knights in worn armor, and even a robed monk leans forward to share a rumor with a hooded traveler. The chairs lining the table look mismatched and uneven. Some are sturdy benches, others simple stools that wobble precariously on warped legs. If you draw one out too quickly, it might tip, prompting a sudden exclamation from the sitter. Over in a corner, a group of travelers has thrown their cloaks on the backs of chairs to claim space near the hearth. The fire pit itself is a stone-lined hearth, its iron grate low so flames lick at pots where pottage simmers. Listening closely, you catch the hum of multiple conversations. Farmers debating taxes, a knight boasting of border skirmishes, and a merchant haggling with a buyer who refuses to budge on the price of imported wool. At intervals, laughter rings out, followed by the rattling sound of tankards slammed against wood. A sudden cheer might erupt when a hand of dice proves lucky, while elsewhere a groan follows a botched roll. You notice the patina on the timber beams overhead, dark streaks left by years of drifting smoke and airborne sparks. In spots, gaps in the thatch allow shafts of daylight to pierce through, illuminating swirling motes of dust that drift down like tiny dancers. These specks settle upon grimy faces and faded tunics before being stirred again by passing servers. The beams seem bowed by time, a silent testament to decades of use. Sometimes a patron engrossed in conversation fails to notice a server approaching, resulting in an unexpected bump and a cascade of ale across the table. The ensuing gasp and clatter of cups, sliding sparks, curses, and a scramble to catch a drinking horn. At your feet, a skinny hound weaves between chair legs in search of scraps. The dog pauses and tilts its head as someone tosses a chunk of stale bread, then scurries to devour the prize before a stray fist. Nearby, someone plays a crude wooden flute, coaxing off-key notes that somehow draw applause. A drummer taps a beat on a high drum. For a few moments, the cacophony settles into a rough rhythm. Yet harmony dissolves as the next round of tankards arrives, and the beat becomes drowned out once more by shouts and jeers. A patron emboldened by drink throws a shout at the musicians, demanding a familiar tune. The tavern's narrow shuttered windows remain closed most days, allowing little fresh air. If a strong wind howls outside, the building creaks in response, and those near the hearth tug cloaks tighter. When rain pours, water drips through roof cracks, surprising guests and provoking curses. Occasionally, lightning flashes through a gap, and for a moment, soot-streaked faces are revealed in stark relief, only to vanish as the next thunderclap roars. Amidst this tumult, individuals slip in and out. A lone traveler, dust-covered and weary, slides onto a bench near the fire, greeted by curious glances. He nods to the keeper, who stands behind a rough counter, and orders a jug of ale. Despite his travel-worn cloak, he exudes caution as though weighing whether to stay. Craftsmen cluster nearby, coins clattering on the bar as they demand more mead. A woman in a dark shawl navigates between tables delivering loaves of coarse bread and small wheels of cheese, nodding to patrons as she passes. Despite the frenzied atmosphere an unspoken code holds, patrons rarely draw steel for blades. Here are more likely confiscated than used. When disputes flare over spilled ale or unwanted advances, chairs or fists become weapons. But a burly patron or the keeper steps in before blood is drawn. Scuffles erupt, and bodies crash into tables as mugs shatter. Yet within minutes someone forces a truce, and laughter resumes as if nothing happened. From every corner, secrets and rumors swirl. Travelers exchange whispers of war or bandits rumored to ambush merchants on forest roads. Merchants trade news of distant markets and shifting coinage value. Soldiers boast of glory while concealing fear in their eyes. The hearth, more than a source of warmth, serves as a beacon around which stories gather. Its burning embers cast a red glow on faces lined by travel and toil, and the crackle of logs punctuates the murmur of gossip. Once you notice the dim glow of lantern lights skittering across smoke-blackened beams, you see the tavern keeper standing behind a roughly hewn counter. He wears a stained tunic with rolled sleeves, and a heavy leather apron drapes over his shoulders, its surface scarred by years of spilled ale and scorching embers. His weathered face, lit by flickering candles, shows eyes sharp as flint eyes that have witnessed drunken brawls, hushed deals, and the full spectrum of human desperation. In his silent posture, authority is clear. He is the final judge of every dispute and the guardian of each coin exchanged within these walls. With steady hands, he lifts a wooden tankard and fills it from a dripping cascale, foaming over the rim in pale amber rivulets. Though each pour seems routine, his mind never rests. He scans the room like a hawk, tracking every raised voice, every shift in posture. The clatter of tankards hitting tables and the rattle of coin on the bar sharpen his instincts. He notices the subtle cues: a clenched jaw, a flicker of a widened glare signals that what began as a friendly evening could erupt into violence at any moment. He remains poised to intervene the instant chaos threatens to overtake order. Patrons approach him with a mixture of respect and caution. A knight in battered armor strides up to the bar, nodding curtly as the keeper places a metal goblet before him. The knight's eyes flick between the amber liquid and the keeper's alert gaze. Both men understand that civility here is fragile, born of necessity rather than mutual warmth. Moments later, a monk in a plain brown robe steps forward, cradling a small purse of coins. The keeper obliges with measured courtesy, ladling a modest measure of honeyed mead into a wooden bowl. No more than 2 cups, he warns gently. Even the clergy must adhere to his rules, for the tavern's safety depends on consistent enforcement. He remains ever vigilant for signs of conflict. When 2 farmhands at a corner table begin arguing over a spilled tankard of ale, their voices rising and turning bitter, the keeper walks briskly to their side. He places a calloused hand on each shoulder, a silent reminder of his reach. His other hand hovers near the hilt of a stout cudgel strapped to his belt, a subtle threat that needs no words. In a low, gravelly voice he commands, "Settle your debts or take it outside." The farmhands exchange uneasy glances, nod, and swiftly draw coins to pay for the broken mug. They know better than to test his resolve. His reputation for swift justice is etched into every scar across his forearms. Yet his duties stretch well beyond quelling drunken fights. Before dawn's first light, he descends into the tavern's back room to inspect barrels stacked against rough stone walls. He hauls each barrel onto a makeshift stand, lifts the wooden spigot, and lets a trickle of ale flow into his cupped palm. A small sip informs him whether the brew is sound or spoiled. If a hint of sourness lingers on his tongue, he signals for the barrel to be drained onto the muddy ground, a loss of coin, but a necessary sacrifice to preserve the tavern's reputation. He negotiates with traveling merchants to secure fresh barrels of ale mead and cider, haggling over price and ensuring shipments arrive before stock dwindles dangerously low. In lean seasons, he counts every gallon, saving enough to carry him through harsh winters, when roads freeze and deliveries become scarce. When the church bell tolls for evening vespers, he braces for the impending surge of patrons. Nights off-duty merchants tallying their day's earnings and laborers seeking warmth and distraction all converge at the tavern's creaking door. He instructs his servers to stoke the hearth into a roaring blaze that banishes the chill from every corner. Near the fire, two courtesans slip behind the bar attendants bearing polished silver rings and painted lips, hoping to entice coins from the more affluent knights and merchants. The keeper tolerates their presence, begrudgingly aware that such opportunities for exchange boost his nightly revenue. But he watches with keen eyes, knowing that jealousy or mischief might soon follow, and is prepared to cut their ventures short at the slightest sign of trouble. As the room fills, seating disputes flare almost instantly. A burly laborer claims a battered bench at the far end, slamming a meaty fist against its rough surface. When a knight in tarnished helm tries to share that same bench, the laborer stands planting his boots wide and glaring down the knight. It is a delicate moment neither man wants to back down alone. Before steel can be drawn, the keeper strides between them, positioning himself like a living barrier. In a calm but unyielding tone, he announces, either share the bench or find another seat. The knight arms folded glares but steps back. The laborer grunts and sits his broad shoulders rolling forward to allow his reluctant companion a place at the table. As dusk deepens into night, his responsibilities shift to maintaining illumination. Candles gutter and die, leaving pockets of darkness where mischief might hide. He retrieves fresh torches from a wooden rack, igniting each with careful strikes until every lantern glows with a sturdy flame. Shadows retreat from corners, and patrons feel the warmth of both hearth and safety. At that moment, a handful of travelers, their cloaks heavy with dust, stumble in from the road. He unlocks a hatch to a narrow staircase leading to a loft above. Straw-stuffed mattresses lie in neat rows ready for lodging. He inspects each mattress, tossing out damp straw and laying down fresh bundles. By ensuring decent beds, he minimizes complaints at dawn. Complaints that could cost him a few precious pennies, or deter future guests. However, not all visitors arrive with honest intent. A pair of cloaked men slip through the entrance, glancing about like watchful wolves. The keeper approaches with quiet steps, placing a calloused hand near the dagger at his belt. No need for blade or battle cry. His presence alone suffices as warning. The strangers pause mid-sip, their shoulders tensing. They exchange quick nods and lower their gazes, realizing that misbehavior here will result in swift reprisal. He lingers just long enough to imprint the message the tavern may welcome travelers, but it enforces its own brand of justice. Near midnight, only a few patrons remain, an aging minstrel murmuring a mournful ballad by the hearth. A pair of merchants whispering of distant markets and fluctuating coinage, and a lone soldier nursing the last of his ale. Their voices, once boisterous, are reduced to murmurs over the crackling coals. The keeper moves among them, lifting empty mugs and discreetly collecting payment. When a drunken noble, flushed and belligerent, demands a free drink, the keeper meets his gaze with unflinching resolve. "You've had your fill, my lord." The noble's mouth tightens, but he steps aside when an attendant inches closer with a replaced tankard of water. No one is above the tavern's rules. Everyone pays their share or faces eviction. Finally, as the first bird song creeps through a cracked window, he extinguishes the hearth's dying embers, leaving only a solitary candle flickering near the bar. He wipes sweat from his brow with a coarse linen rag and tallies the night's receipts in a weathered ledger, coins, counted losses noted, and a brief mention of the brawl between the knight and the laborer. He surveys the silent room benches, empty, overturned mugs, and straggles of hay scattered from the loft. Satisfaction washes over him. Order has been preserved, patrons have paid their dues, and the tavern stands ready for a new day. Before he finally retires to his own modest chamber above, he takes one last walk through the empty tables. His fingers brush over rough wood gouged by blade and knife, reminders of past disputes. In a corner, he pauses by the pile of discarded straw and sawdust used to soak up spilled ale. His gaze drifts to a tattered scrap of parchment discovered under a stool, a hastily scrawled note about a traveling minstrel carrying news of a noble scandal. He tucks it away, considering whether a small favor tomorrow morning, perhaps buying a round for the minstrel, might yield information worth its weight in gold. With a final nod to his domain, he ascends narrow stairs to his chamber, ready to sleep until the tavern once again beckons at first light, where he will resume his endless vigil over ale dispute and profit. By now, the tavern's timid glow has settled into a steady hum, and the tavern keeper's measured vigilance yields to a deeper focus on what truly keeps his establishment afloat: the flow of drink. Stout wooden barrels line the rear wall, each one a promise of warmth and liquid solace for travelers battered by both road and worry. As you weave through the crowded tables and heedless laughter, you can almost taste the heady aroma rising from these barrels, an intoxicating blend of malt honey and orchard-sweet apples. The tavern keeper, having reconciled disputes and juggled coin, now turns his attention to tapping those barrels for the quality and variety of beverages define the evening's fortunes. In one corner, a server braces a fresh barrel of ale on a crooked stand. The tavern keeper kneels beside it, hefting the wooden mallet that has earned its dents through countless taps. With a practiced strike, he drives the spigot into the oak, and a pale amber stream of ale floods into a pewter tankard. Tiny bubbles surge and pop along the lip as the server slides the tankard across the well-worn counter. You can sense tension in his shoulders. He knows that each draw must be void of sourness or risk ruinous complaints. A single off taste can send a rowdy table into a racket of suspicion, and rumor travels as fast as spilled ale. Behind the bar, in the dim lantern light, the keeper pauses over a barrel of mead, its surface mottled with faint haze, the smell clinging to the cool wood like a whispered secret. Mead here is a rarity. Honey harvests can be unpredictable, and good suppliers are few. He plucks a slender ladle from a leather strap and dips it into the golden depths. A taste confirms what his trained palate already suspected: the mead is overly sweet, trapped beneath excessive yeast that makes his cheeks burn. Sighing, he nods to a nearby apprentice and instructs him to mark this barrel for dilution. Soon fresh water will be drawn to temper the sweetness, preserving the mead's drinkable nuance, but sacrificing a fraction of its potency. In this dimly lit alcove economy and quality wage a careful war. As the ale and mead circulate, a merchant in a patched cloak sidles up to the bar, tapping his fingers on the counter. He orders a goblet of cider valued for its crisp bite, but often a gamble when pressings run dry. The keeper slides open a small hatch to reveal a slender jug, ice cold and glistening. With gentle arms, he pours the cider, a pale cloudy liquid that hisses against the pewter rim. Clouds swirl like unripe fruit in spring wind. The merchant inhales deeply, nods to himself, and passes a small pouch of coins across the counter. The keeper tucks the pouch into a leather pouch beneath his apron, then offers a curt nod as the merchant retreats to a table where he and two companions debate routes to distant markets. Every coin earned cements the tavern's reputation. If the cider sours or the pour is stingy, the next traveler's hard-earned groat may bypass this very establishment. Beyond the bar, women in simple linen skirts cradle clay pitchers of water. Only a handful of patrons, usually the poorest or those forced by necessity, risk drinking it. The water has its own perils: mud, an animal runoff whisper in every drop, and purification is a luxury few can afford. A farmer with cracked hands approaches to fill a chipped wooden bowl. The keeper glances at him with thinly veiled disapproval. Your ale costs but a sip more and won't carry fever down your throat, he advises, knowing full well that honesty here is cheaper than a funeral pyre. But the farmer's pockets are nearly bare, so he pours the murky water into his bowl and retreats to lick salt from his cracked lips, a reminder that for many the tavern's cheapest option still carries risk. Elsewhere, a band of knights entertaining themselves at the hearth beckons a server with eager hands. When their mugs arrive foaming high with ale, they lift them in a ceremonial toast. To king and conquest their voices ring clear above the general uproar, and nearby a laborer begrudgingly echoes, "To king," and conquest seeing a chance to curry favor or simply to join in the communal spectacle. The keeper watches from afar, aware that these knights can bolster his coffers tonight, but also knowing their pride can sour into quicksilver. A spilled drink could unleash a torrent of bravado-fueled wrath. At a rough-hewn table near the entryway, two sullen-looking travelers pore over a tattered ledger, debating prices for horse fodder in the approach of winter. Between them stands a large jug of watered-down mead, its sweetness barely masking the pittance of honey in each cup. With each sip, one of the travelers grimaces, forcing the mead down, as if it were medicine. The tavern keeper had anticipated this, ordering the dilution at dawn, after noticing a horde of bees near the honey store that spring. A bad honey harvest had driven prices skyward, leaving him no choice but to stretch each cask to satisfy demand. He knows many tavern keepers would use inferior honey outright, or serve only ale, but he gambles on a blend. A compromise that keeps patrons loyal enough to return, but skilled enough to ensure they don't settle their thirst elsewhere. In an opposite corner, a trio of local craftsmen lounge over mugs of ale, their conversation thick with comparisons molding clay, forging iron layering plaster. When a server brings another round, the keeper pauses to observe their reaction. Each sets aside a pile of coins more generous than before. Their acceptance of the keeper's ale signals trust born of satisfactory brews, an unspoken endorsement that the ale here is worth the pennies. Word of mouth is the tavern's true currency. Each foaming mug that leaves the bar fortifies this humble fortress of commerce. As the evening deepens into a hush of low voices, the tavern keeper's duties shift to managing spoilage. He recalls a barrel of ale tapped weeks ago, beer that if forgotten will turn as rancid as spoiled milk. Kneeling, he withdraws a narrow sample from its brass spigot, a sullen brown color, the foam flat and dead. He curses under his breath, prying loose the tap and dumping the rest onto the dirt floor. Better to lose that barrel now than to poison the tavern's reputation for months to come. This loss is painful. Each ale-filled cask represents days of brewing, the sweat of cooperage, and the promise of coins. But in his ledger, he notes the spoilage as a necessary sacrifice, a reminder that quality must outweigh a fleeting gain. On the thronged benches near the hearth, a pair of monks in threadbare habits deliberate quietly over a flagon of honeyed mead. Their conversation drifts to scripture and the state of distant monasteries. The tavern keeper senses their eagerness to avoid the dank chill of the chapel courtyard outside, and he values their custom as much as any knight's. When their flagon empties, he offers a fresh pour at half measure. The monks murmur thanks, slipping him a coin with a solemn nod. Their presence here, praying travelers seeking shelter, offers more than mere revenue. It bestows a subtle blessing that eases his conscience, for in a world laced with hardship, small acts of charity are windfalls unto the soul. Beyond these interactions, the tavern keeper maintains a delicate balance among the drinks he offers. He erects a small ledger on a battered stool, listing each barrel, its origin, its age, its cost per cup. When a traveling brewer arrives with news of a newly discovered malt strain, the keeper negotiates feverishly through the night, measuring weight in sacks of barley and honey in pounds. His shrewd mind calculates potential profits against the risk of untested stock. If the malt proves too acidic or the honey infested with pollen from poisonous heather, guests could swoop fast like hawks to warn others, and the tavern's standing could crumble. But when a new barrel passes muster, sparkling with promise, the tavern keeper unveils it during the height of revelry. A ceremonious tapping draws gasps and cheers. Patrons line up eager to taste the novelty of beer, amber and clear as polished brass, with a head thick as whipped cream and the tang of citrus on the tongue. For a moment, laughter quiets as each sip is granted reverent focus. Under that single lantern flame, you glimpse in each eye the spark of shared discovery. It is this fleeting sense of wonder that motivates the keeper more than any pittance earned, a reminder that his calling is not merely to sell drink, but to forge fleeting moments of delight that cut through the drudgery of life's trials. Outside, a sudden gust rattles the shutters and a sprinkle of rain begins. By the hearth faces glow with camaraderie, warmed by ale and anticipation. The tavern keeper retreats behind his bar one last time, surveying the ebbing crowd as mugs are refilled or laid aside. At this hour, some are already too drunk to notice heads lolling as if rocked by unseen currents. Others revel in boisterous chatter, their spirits buoyed by each heavy draught. The clink of coin on the bar grows faint as the night yields to a rhythm all its own. One of slurred confessions, whispered confidences, and the occasional clank of a dagger tapping the pewter rim. And so, as you take your final look at this mad symphony of drink, you understand the tavern keeper's true craft, not merely to serve ale mead, cider, and water, but to read the tides of human need, thirst, comfort, oblivion, and to meet them with a careful pour. Each barrel tapped is a thread in a fragile tapestry, each cup offered a fleeting chance at warmth. In that smoky air beneath the low-hung lanterns, you feel how the keeper's choices ripple through the crowd, binding patrons to one another, and to the promise of a safe haven, if only for a night. And when dawn's gray fingers reach through the shuttered windows, only empty casks and lingering notes of mead-scented dreams will remain to whisper of the hours when this tavern was more than a house of wood and straw. It was the heart of a small, raucous world, pulsing with life, warmed by the very drink that carried its stories forward. Now that the tavern's barrels have been tapped, and its keeper has assured a steady flow of ale, mead, and cider, your attention shifts to what lies on the tables, the simple offerings meant to sustain battered travelers rather than delight refined palates. When dusk settles, and flames from the central hearth dance upon rough-hewn boards, the air grows thick with smoke and the low murmur of conversation. Yet beneath it all lies the aroma of cauldrons, simmering an earthy, starchy scent that hints at the meager fare to come. At the far end of the room, beside the hearth's glowing embers, a pair of servers tend to a large iron pot suspended over coals. Its contents, a pottage of barley root vegetables and remnants of salted meat, sways with a rhythmic bite of heat. The cooks have stirred it continuously throughout the day, adding water from the chipped wooden bucket, and bits of whatever scraps remain, wilted onions, bruised carrots, and possibly a handful of turnips. The result is a thick beige stew that resembles mud more than a meal, yet it provides the only reliable sustenance for most who gather here. As the server ladles a portion into a chipped wooden bowl, the liquid oozes out in a slow, reluctant pour. The chunk of gristly meat sinks to the bottom, concealed by the starchy broth. This bowl, once handed over, is prized more for its warmth than any flavor it might dare to offer. A peasant woman in a tattered cloak grips the bowl with weathered hands, blowing gently to cool its surface before drawing it to her lips. Each spoonful brings a gulp of tepid, grainy liquid. The dull tang of salt interrupts the earthiness of the barley. She swallows it in hurried intervals, mindful of those standing behind her, desperate for any taste of nourishment. Nearby, a soldier, his armor pitted from countless skirmishes, sits on a stool, his helm set aside. He dips a crust of bread into the pottage, letting the stew soak into the crumb until its softness yields under his grip. This bread is dense and heavy baked yesterday, or perhaps even earlier, its crumb cold and stiff. Crumbs cascade onto the tavern's dirt floor as he tears off sizable chunks with great effort, exposing the white doughy core. The crust is dark and firm, evidence of a swift bake in a communal oven where temperature control is poor and smoke infiltrates every loaf. He savors each bit as if it were fine pastry, though his jaw works with the urgency of hunger rather than pleasure. Across the hearth, a group of laborers cluster around a small table, their mugs of ale set aside temporarily. They hold wooden plates heavy with slices of hard cheese and strips of salt-cured pork. the cheese aged beyond its prime has a pungent ammonia-like sting that assaults the nostrils when inhaled. Despite its sharp tang, the workers bite into it with determined expressions, knowing that every scrap proffers calories essential to their survival. When they finish a piece, they wipe their meaty fingers on the backs of their coarse sleeves before reaching for another. The strips of pork hang limply from the plates, the flesh shriveled from brine that preserved it longer than nature intended. Its edges have turned nearly black, and the interior fibers are tough as cords. Yet soaked overnight in cool water, the brine has mellowed slightly. A laborer tears off a piece and chews it with slow deliberation, his jaw working through sinewy strands until the salt and grease spread over his tongue like a bitter balm. He washes it down with ale, the bitter malt cutting through the grease for a momentary reprieve. At a narrower table nearby, a trio of traveling actors, faces smudged with makeup from their last performance, share a modest basket of eggs. These are not fresh by any standard. The shells show telltale signs of slight cracks that have been hastily resealed with pitch. When tapped lightly, they still bear the hollow thump of spoiled whiten. Yet each egg is beaten into a makeshift omelet in a small skillet perched over an iron brazier. The cook drizzles a little rancid oil into the pan, causing it to sputter and flame for a moment, before the egg liquid drops into the skillet. The odor of scorched fat mingles with the sulfuric note of old egg, producing a stench that would send any non-hungry soul scrambling for fresh air. But hunger prevails, and the performers scrape at the thin, uneven crust that forms, dispatching each bite with exaggerated moans of satisfaction. Part showmanship, part necessity. Amidst these scenes, the tavern's flickering lantern light reveals the visitor with a meager loaf of rye bread. The crust is so thick that it could serve as a hammer. A single slice takes a small fortune of effort to detach. Yet the earthy aroma of rye draws his eye. He tears off a hunk and smears it with a smear of lard purchased for a few coins when the price was low. The lard, soft and greasy, coats the bread in a slick sheen. With each bite, the dry bread absorbs the fat, and its bitter grain notes are smoothed by the lard's rich weight. He chews deliberately, his gaze shifting to the pottage pot as he weighs the familiar comfort of bread against the sustenance it offers. The tavern keeper, vigilant, even as cups clink and laughter rises, keeps a careful eye on the comings and goings of bowls and platters. When the last slice of bread disappears from a vendor's basket, he nods to a server. Moments later, the vendor approaches the hearth with a small coil of dough molded into flattened rounds. She places them on a cast-iron griddle, stamping heat from the coals. Each flatbread hisses against the iron before releasing a golden brown pattern across its surface. The scent of baking dough wafts through the tavern, familiar enough to set hearts racing with anticipation. Yet when the flatbreads emerge slightly charred at the edges, a mere one or two per traveler, they are devoured, instantly gnawed into by eager teeth until nothing remains but a smudge of flour and a few stray crumbs. Throughout the room, sharing is tacitly enforced by scarcity. When a bowl of pottage is depleted at one table, it often passes as a communal bowl to the next, reducing the already modest portions for each group. A knight accustomed to roasted venison and pastries grumbles as he tastes the coarse barley gruel, but he knows he cannot afford rudeness. He lifts the communal bowl with a grimace, allowing the server to refill it from the iron cauldron. Meanwhile, his companion, a merchant with a stout coin purse, scoops up another ladle, passing the bowl back to the server when empty. This cycle repeats until only slivers of meat remain, at which point the bowl is set aside for cleaning its remnants to be scraped into a trough for a tethered pig in the barn attached to the tavern. Firelight flickers against the backs of stools and the faces bent close to wooden boards. Here and there, patrons carefully ration small wedges of cheese, pulling each to its limit before discarding the rind. A pair of monks, their tunics patched and frayed, offer prayers muttered under their breath as they sip broth from two empty shells of bread. They have contributed a few coins, scant payment for a meal often provided out of pity. Yet they exchange grateful nods, mindful that many are turned away or left to survive on roots and weeds for days on end. Beyond the main hall in the loft, where straw mattresses wait, a lone traveler emerges to retrieve a small jug of water and a handful of stale breadcrumbs. He descends the narrow staircase, navigating in near darkness until he stands before the hearth. Water, though cheap, has its dangers. An unseen drop of stagnant dew can carry sickness. Still, his thirst outweighs caution. He dips the jug into the pot of water that darkens a wooden tub in the corner, then returns to upstairs to sip in solitude, carefully rationing each taste. A single crumb of bread is gnawed like a precious jewel. Despite the roughness of the tavern's offerings, camaraderie sprouts in the hardships shared. A peasant flanks the hearth holding his bowl of pottage on his lap and offers a spoonful to a young beggar who has nowhere else to go. The beggar accepts gratefully, his face dirty from days on the road, and takes the bowl back to his own corner. Simultaneously, a traveling bard wanders from table to table, collecting leftover bits of cheese and meat, redistributing them to those who cannot pay. His lute rests at his side, strings silent until the hunger lull eases enough for him to pluck a few notes, offering a melody in exchange for the morsels. Occasionally, arguments flare over meager portions. Two soldiers, uneasy after a long day of patrols, edge too close to a single loaf of flatbread. Their fingers brush and suspicion ignites. Shouts arise. "That's my share," one cries, flinging his arm wide. The other retorts with a hint of his sword hilt. "Mine I saw it first." Before steel is drawn, the tavern keeper emerges from behind the bar. His presence enough to quell this primal contest. His voice cuts through the clamor. "Your pay is done. You have each had 3 slices of bread. To fight for more is madness." Grumbling, they retreat to opposite ends of the hall, lowering their heads as though chastised by a father. As night deepens, the final bowls of pottage disappear, along with the last scraps of hardened cheese, the few remaining slices of salted pork, and the remainder of flatbreads. The air, once thick with steam and the scent of cooking, settles into the cold tang of leftover ale and the dim glow of dying embers. Patrons rise to their feet, some clutching empty bowls in hand, while others stagger toward the loft, guided by torches. The tavern's noises soften, cups no longer clink against tables, and the murmur of conversation dims to a hushed undertone. In the early hours, the tavern keeper returns to check on any lingering embers before bedding down in his modest, private chamber above. He reflects on the night's distribution of food, who went hungry, who managed a modest meal, and who against all odds found a scrap or two thanks to another's generosity. In this place of bread and broth, hunger is never quite sated, yet sustenance, however coarse, binds these disparate souls together. When dawn's first light filters through cracks in the shuttered windows, a new day begins. The pottage pot will soon be swept clean, ready for fresh water and the next gathering of travelers. The bakery will deliver another load of loaves, each one a chance for a hungry soul to taste warmth. And the tavern keeper, ever vigilant, will once again manage the flow of both drink and bread, striving to keep the peace and ensure that the tavern's hearth remains a place where even the humblest traveler can find a bowl of pottage and the fleeting comfort of a shared meal. In this way, the simple, unadorned nourishment of the yeasty bread, the brackish broth, and the stubborn cheese illuminates a truth in the smoky tavern. Food is more than survival. It is the hearth's quiet promise that no matter how rough the road, there is always a place to gather, break bread, and remember what it means to be human. After the last scraps of bread vanish and bowls of gruel cool on weary laps, the tavern's true purpose comes into fuller view. A crucible where stories mingle like spilled ale. With bellies warmed by the pottage and meat's salt lingering on their tongues, patrons lean in toward one another, driven not by hunger but by curiosity. A farmer, his hands still sticky with broth, settles onto a bench across from a traveling scholar, clutching a tattered parchment. They exchange nods, silent invitations to share what they know. Soon murmured talk swells into a tapestry of news, rumor, and speculation that courses through the hall more lively than any flame. At first, a group of laborers near the hearth confers in low voices their conversation, half hidden by the crackle of embers. They speak of the Lord's latest decree, a levy on grain that threatens their meager earnings and could drive the price of bread beyond reach. Each sentence sparks nods and shallow curses. Though their coats are patched and faces lined by toil, their hearts flare with righteous indignation. Nearby, a fine-spoken merchant interjects, offering precise details gleaned from the market in the next town. Silver coin has fluctuated, he says, and a shipment of barley has been delayed by a washed-out bridge. These facts delivered in clipped tones lend weight to the laborers' grievances, turning idle complaints into urgent discourse. Across the space, reconciliation between fact and fear unfolds. A monk robed like a shadow leans close to a burly blacksmith and relays whispered news of an abbey to the north that has taken in refugees fleeing pillaging soldiers. His voice is hushed, reverent, as though he speaks of a miracle rather than a sanctuary. The blacksmith's iron-gray eyes widen. He passes the tale along to a cloak-shrouded traveler, who in turn will carry it westward to his own kin. In this way, the tavern becomes a living network, each teller a node through which hope and fear spread. A hushed hush falls when a knight's sword, still slung across his back, enters with purposeful stride. His polished helm glints in the lantern light. Every head turns, every conversation dips as if choked by his presence. Removing his helm, he reveals a face trimmed with a well-kept beard, eyes dark and serious. He strides to the bar, nods curtly to the keeper, and orders ale. While the wooden bowl is being filled, his gauntleted fingers remove a crumpled letter from beneath his breastplate. He scans the parchment in silent concentration, then tucks it back inside. Others watch, caught between respect for his prowess and fear of his rank. When he finally turns to join a small table of squires, he projects the unspoken message that a knight's news carries more weight than any farmer's muttering. Not all tidings bear gravitas. At a nearby table, young men too young for battle, but old enough to swagger gamble on who will mess with market regulations first. They imitate the Lord's mannerisms as though miming a play. I shall raise taxes on your seed, one jests, thumping the table as though commanding his men. Raucous laughter follows, relaxed and unguarded. Yet as the laughter subsides, they lean forward to share what they've heard of distant courts, rumors of a princess abducted a baron turned traitor, or a secret alliance between rival houses. The details blur like ink smudged by ale, but the pulse of excitement is real. The youth share these half-formed stories as though they are scripture, eager to see how each version evolves with every telling. Along the far wall, women, many perhaps wives of traveling merchants or local artisans seeking respite, gather around a rough-hewn table. They compare gossip about a traveling courtesan whose charms turned an earl's head, leaving her pockets lined with gold, and him nursing a broken pride. More sober tales surface too, a midwife in the next village, whose skills saved an infant from illness, a neighbor who slipped into debt after borrowing heavily for a festival. Each snippet of news passes from hand to hand, feathered with laughter or laced with sympathy. When a vinegary-faced woman remarks that the midwife's secret remedy was nothing but wild herbs, another retorts with soft indignation, "How can you deny the divine when a babe lives?" Voices rise, but no more than they must, for the tavern keeper has made it clear that tempers once flared must be soothed before flames spread. Meanwhile, a traveling bard lute slung across his back glides through the crowd like a gentle breeze, pausing at each cluster of listeners. From him, the tenor of news takes on a more melodious form, a ballad about a knight's doomed love, a lament for a village lost to plague, or a comic ditty mocking a foolish baron who bet his wealth on a cockfight. Strings strum softly, drawing attention even from those lost in more somber exchanges. His voice lilting and fluid transforms bitter rumor into song, softening grief into shared memory and turning mockery into laughter that rings like silver. Patrons follow his verses as though they are lifelines, moments when sorrow or anger is laid aside in favor of collective experience. Of course, some guests resist the tide of conversation. A cloaked stranger face, half hidden in shadow, sits apart from the bustle, sipping water from a chipped bowl with measured caution. Occasionally, he scribbles in a leather-bound journal, recording what he hears. Is he a spy for the Earl of Nottingham? A scribe chronicling the realm's woes? No one challenges him, though suspicion lingers. Each time voices rise above a hum, he flinches as though loud news might reveal his own hidden agenda. By candlelight, you catch his keen gaze as it sweeps across faces, observations more effective than any question asked. His silence speaks volumes in a place where words fly like arrows. A quiet observer can strike hardest. As hours drift by, the pace of chatter ebbs and flows with the clink of ale mugs and the crackle of embers. When the hoofbeats of a cavalry patrol echo from the road outside, talk falters. Merchants lean forward to exchange hurried assessments of whether the soldiers bring news of impending conflict or merely random patrols to deter bandits. If conflict looms, transactions shift from coin to caution. Futures are argued, routes reconsidered, and families weighed against wages. When the patrol's hoofbeats fade, relief flows like liberated breath, and conversation surges once more, brighter, bolder, as though the threat has reminded each of their mortality. In the dimmest corner of the room, a pair of elderly townsmen faces, worn by age and care, share details of an old border dispute. They speak in nostalgic tones of a time when knights still settled differences with steel instead of ink, and villages counted their dead in seasons. Their gravelly voices carry authority. Younger patrons pause, listening for truths buried beneath layers of history. The older men's tales stitch together threads of the past and present, creating a tapestry that reminds everyone that no matter how dire today's levies or shortages, their forebears endured far worse. In that warm circle of flickering candlelight, collective memory provides solace and perspective, forging bonds that transcend station and profession. Elsewhere, a group of soldiers returning from a skirmish share more immediate reports. They pass a jug of ale as each recounts how his comrade fell to a wounded cutlass, or how the enemy archers rained arrows like hail. Their words are punctuated by sighs and emphatic nods, carrying the weight of loss and relief in equal measure. When one soldier describes the grim sight of a hillside strewn with fallen men, a hush descends over nearby tables. For a moment, even the laughter of rowdy youths feels hollow. Then slowly someone raises a toast to the fallen, and glasses chime softly, soon replaced by the steady hum of normal chatter, as if the lament must give way to living. Scattered throughout the tavern, fleeting alliances form as information travels. A merchant hears that a smuggler's route through the mountains has been compromised. He leans in to warn a knight who has just purchased a herd of sheep destined for that very pass. The knight mutters, "I will find another path," and the merchant nods, sliding off. A young scribe, eyes bright with ambition, trades secrets with a cloaked stranger knowledge that may secure him a commission in a distant court. Each shared whisper, each dramatic proclamation knits a web invisible to the untrained eye, binding destinies tighter than any contract inked on parchment. Amid this swirl, the tavern keeper remains vigilant, as he did when he guided ale to eager lips and broth to hungry hands. He moves like a silent conductor, pausing now and then to clarify a misunderstood detail or to gently nudge a heated argument away from blades. When two merchants argue over whether the king's tax collectors will soon descend on their caravans, the keeper steps between them and lowers his voice to a calm but firm tone. Speak of your rates and routes, but leave talk of rebellion for another day. His intervention serves as a reminder that while news may be currency, here order is imperative. Without it, tongues slip, and tempers flare until steel is drawn. By the time the lanterns burn low and only embers glow like embers in a dying fire, the tavern has become a crossroads of rumor and reality. Travelers rise to leave, clutching new leads to markets and warnings of impending peril. Laborers wipe soot from their faces and mutter promises to share the grain levy news at the next chapel gathering. Knights sling their swords and polish battered helms, recalling rumors of alliances as they plan their own next moves. Bards sling their lutes and hum refrains learned too late a melody that will soon be carried to distant halls, transformed by every retelling. Even as the tavern empties, its echo lingers in the wind that whistles through the cracks of shuttered windows. A candle guttering near the bar casts a final glow upon scratches in the wood telltale marks where patrons once carved names and dates memorials of who was here and what they knew. Tomorrow the tavern keeper will sweep clean the hearth's ashes and refill the barrels, but the spoken words of tonight will linger longer than any spilled ale. They will shape journeys, influence alliances, and bind a disparate cast of souls into an unspoken fellowship. In the morning, when a cockerel crows beyond the shuttered windows, the stories born from this smoky hall will have already crisscrossed fields and fords. A rumor of a falling bridge will send merchants packing their wagons. Talk of a hidden treasure will spur fortune seekers to recruit guides. News of a bandit camp will arm knights for escort duty. All these ripples begin strangely enough over a simple meal of gruel and stale bread in this dimly lit tavern. For here in the aftermath of hunger's relief, conversation proves more sustaining than any loaf of rye or slice of hard cheese. It is the invisible sustenance that compels each weary traveler to linger a moment longer, to lean closer to a neighbor's ear, and to spread their tale like embers fanned by the hearth's last flickering breath. When conversations ripple from topic to topic, a palpable tension arises near one worn table, where a group of figures leans in eyes bright with competitive zeal. They've abandoned talk of levies and border skirmishes, shifting instead to the roll of ivory dice and the shuffle of crude playing cards splayed across scarred wood. The lantern overhead shudders, as if eager to reveal more the colors of worn cards. Reds faded to pink-black, softened to a steely gray, and the dice pitted and slick with sweat from countless palms. In this corner, chance becomes more intoxicating than ale, and the clack of bone against wood is a siren song for those hungry for diversion or desperate for a stroke of fortune. A pair of farmers with work-worn faces sit on rough stools, their tunics streaked with dirt and barley dust. They launch into the first round, fingers curling around dice so stained that no one could tell whose last roll brought victory or ruin. One shakes his hand, heart hammering, then casts the dice onto the table. They tumble over irregular grain knots and settle with a sharp click double fives. He exhales, pushing his remaining coppers forward only to watch his opponent, a wiry younger man with jealous eyes, glare as he rolls double sixes. Groans ripple through the nearby crowd, some lamenting with sympathy, others jeering in playful derision. The winner scoops the coins free, cradling them like a shepherd guarding lambs. The loser grips the edge of his seat jaw, clenched, partly angry at his own misfortune, partly gratified that the brief hostilities of rhetoric have been replaced by a clash of luck. Across the table, a merchant in a patched cloak slides a leather pouch of coins toward a burly squire whose polished breastplate still bears smudges of dried blood. The merchant's fingers tremble as he takes a handful of dice, his mind racing to calculate what this win could mean enough to buy fresh provisions for his next convoy or to ward off the looming threat of debt. The squire, confident and broad-shouldered, casts his dice with a casual flick, as though courting chance rather than fearing it. They roll teeter on the edge of a gouge and collapse into an uneven set, the squire's victory. Cheers erupt abruptly, the merchant slumping back in his stool as onlookers jeer at his folly. Coins jingle, destined to clink against the squire's knee as he weighs them in his palm, eyes flicking to the doorway, as if imagining what else he might wager on next. Not far away, a trio of travelers, face streaked with soot, and cloaks stiff with travel grime clusters around a barrel turned on its side as an impromptu table. Their game is one of rough cards, tanned pigskin rectangles inked with crude symbols of cups, swords, and sheaves of grain. Each card is unique, hand-painted with brush strokes that sloppily bleed into one another. The players grin at one another, shrewd yet cordial, as one woman flourishes her hand, revealing a flush of winning cards. Her companions lean forward, eyes narrowing, measuring her confidence. With a deft motion, she flicks down the final card, a triumphant crimson chalice etched with a gold-inlaid crown. The other two slump, shaking their heads as she scoops up a mound of coins and tucks them into her satchel. She offers a fleeting smile to each, a gesture of grace meant to soothe bruised egos, then slips her winnings into a hidden pocket. The dim lantern light glints off a silver ring on her finger, perhaps a silent promise of greater wealth to come. Meanwhile, alongside this contest of wits, two local laborers have transformed a rough patch of floor beside their stools into a miniature field for knuckle bones, small, 8-sided bones from sheep shanks, polished, smooth by time, and gripping friction. Each bone is held between thumb and forefinger, thrown with a sickle-shaped motion that sends them dancing across the grain. As they land, the laborers gauge whether the patterns yield favor, 3 bones resting on their flat sides, 2 on their edges. Whichever side shows more flat surfaces wins the round. Their wagers are small few coins or a chunk of hardened cheese, yet the intensity in their eyes says this is far more than a game. It's a fleeting claim to prosperity, a momentary relief from toil's demands. Everyone clusters around them, watching the bones tumble in silence, then erupting into derisive laughter or loud cheers as each round concludes. Not everyone welcomes these competitions. A monk in a threadbare habit watches from his bench, arms crossed and brow furrowed. He shifts uncomfortably as he absently traces a finger along a chipped bowl of pottage at his feet. His vow of simplicity forbids games of chance, yet he lingers, perhaps drawn by the human need to connect, to witness how fortunes shift, as unpredictably as life itself. A beggar, noticing the monk's steady gaze, sidles over and invites him to place a single coin, an offering to fate. The monk hesitates, glancing at his fellow supplicants who depend on alms for warmth and bread. He shakes his head and returns to his seat, but a soft smile flickers. The flickering dice have offered him a lesson in humility, a reminder that faith and chance can converge in mysterious ways. Nearby, those who cannot afford coins still find games that cost nothing but pride. 2 youths, cheeks ruddy from ale and excitement, have taken to a paused game of half-cups, scooping a single clay cup and tossing it blindfolded toward a line drawn in straw on the floor. If the cup lands upright, the tosser claims a piece of bread. If not, he must chug a serving of bitter mead straight from the mug. Each blindfolded attempt is greeted with shouts of encouragement or mocking laughter as the cup skitters off course or spins into a precarious balance. The crowd's energy builds with each toss. Onlookers lean in, biting their lips, placing small bets of flatbreads or cloth scraps. When the cup finally settles upright against all odds, the tavern roars as though a knight has returned victorious from battle. The youth raises his arms in triumph, only to drag the cup back for another quest, a chance for more bread, or a deeper embrace of mead-induced oblivion. As the evening darkens further, another spectacle unfolds. A minstrel with a battered lute takes a few steps toward the hearth. His dark, calloused fingers strum a rudimentary melody that drifts through the smoky haze. Encouraged by the clink of coins tossed into his hat, he offers a song of lost love and distant shores. But soon his performance shifts. He invites onlookers to test their cunning in a version of Guess the Number where patrons shout their guesses as he rolls a single die behind his back. If someone matches the hidden face, he skips a verse and offers a verse of merry jests instead. A cheerful farmer guesses 3. The die shows 6. A merchant calls 5. The die falls on 5. Cheers erupt as the bard offers a quick ditty in honor of the merchant's luck. weaving his name into a couplet that leaves the tavern in stitches. Once again, laughter and clinking coins become the soundtrack of this raucous hall. Yet not all wagers end in good spirits. At a stout table near the entrance, a gambler with a scarred cheek barks at his companion as suspicion boils in his veins. "You stack the deck, I know you do." He snarls, slamming a fist so hard that his tankard trembles. His companion, a pale-faced traveler in threadbare garb, leans back, eyes wide as ships on a stormy sea. He denies foul play, but the gambler's hand darts toward a small dagger at his belt. Bystanders freeze the clatter of dice and laughter fading to uneasy silence. Before steel is drawn, the tavern keeper appears stepping between them with silent authority. He nods to the keeper's aide, who deftly sweeps the cards from the table, and without a word the tension dissolves, though grudges simmer beneath scowls and clenched jaws. In another corner, a quiet game of quick coins draws a hushed chorus. A single penny is flipped on its edge and covered by a cloth square, then slid across the table amid a flurry of cups. Patrons guess which cup hides the coin. It is a game of cunning and stealth where fingers must move fluidly yet quietly, and eyes must betray nothing. Each revelation of an empty cup brings a chorus of groans. Finding the coin elicits cheers that echo off the soot-blackened walls. When a traveling knight quietly bests an entire table of merchants, he gathers his winnings without celebration, his demeanor as composed as a monk's prayer. His earned gold glints in the lamplight as he folds his cloak and retreats to a vacant corner, chin raised in measured satisfaction. But as the hour nears midnight, the stakes shift from coins to pride and from laughter to challenge. A tavern brawler, his knuckles swollen and dark with bruises, challenges anyone bold enough to a duel of dice. He announces a searing rule: double or nothing, lad. Win and I give you my tankard. Lose, and you fetch me my next 3 rounds. His booming voice draws the entire room's attention, and several patrons edge around the table, hesitant to cross his path. An intrepid laborer, fresh from a hard day's work, steps forward, shoulders squared and eyes bright with defiance. The brawler smirks, flicks his wrist to reveal dice covered in new etching symbols of victory. The laborer, undeterred, produces his own pair of dice, each carved with a simple cross on the one face. With a rallying breath, he kneels and casts. The dice crack across the oak, revealing 2 crosses, a sign of divine favor or sheer stubborn luck. The tavern erupts as the brawler's face flushes with shock and rage. True to his word, he claps the laborer on the back, handing over a worn tankard whose metal has lost its luster from years of use. The laborer lifts the tankard so high that swing light illuminates his rough-hewn grin, and then he retreats to the bar to claim his prize, 3 fresh rounds of ale distributed among his friends in a gesture of communal triumph. As the embers fade and a hush falls over the benches, the tavern keeper surveys the scattered coins, the battered dice, and the crumpled cards. He notes who won, who lost, and who will return tomorrow to chase the thrill of uncertainty once more. Games of chance here are more than mere diversion. They are a mirror to life's unpredictability, where victory and defeat hinge on slight shifts beyond one's control. For a night, fortunes change hands, and rivalries are born and extinguished in a single roll. Tomorrow's sun may rise on empty pockets or unexpected wealth, but tonight, within these smoke-stained walls, every lost penny and every triumphant toss is a story woven into the tavern's living tapestry. In this dim glow where laughter and curses collide, the games of chance remind each soul that however harsh the world outside, there remains a spark of hope in every dice cast and every card laid, an ember of possibility that glows as brightly as any hearth flame. After the dice settle and the cheers fade, the tavern's mood shifts as music beckons from the corner. A minstrel, rough fingers wrapped around a weathered lute, strikes a chord that reverberates through the smoky haze. Patrons who had been hunched over tables rise slightly, mugs paused in midair, as the first notes dance across the low beams. His voice, a warm tenor, with an edge of gravel, sings of distant valleys, and lost love notes rising above the clink of tankards and the crackle of embers. Faces soften at each verse, a soldier. His helmet set aside, listens as though recalling a battlefield lullaby. A farmer rubs his calloused hands together, fingers twitching to the rhythm as though he could till his fields anew in song. Even the squire who won at dice leans forward, briefly setting aside brash confidence for quiet appreciation. As the final chord lingers, the tavern exhales in applause. From that applause emerges a pair of dancers. He wears a patched doublet, her simple gown sways with each determined step. They glide onto the rough wooden floor boots, scuffing in a steady rhythm that beckons others to join. A laborer sets aside his ale and offers his hand to a companion. Soon the dance spreads like wildfire. A minstrel's melody guides the circle, feet tap, bodies whirl near the glowing hearth, and sparks drift upward as if celebrating mortal joy. The guard shift outside passes unheard through closed shutters. Inside, worries of levies and losses dissolve in the heat of movement. A mother rocking her infant on a bale of hay hums softly to match the beat lullaby and dance entwined. Two monks rise to join, gently robes catching the lamplight as they move with unexpected grace, a testament to the power of melody. As the dancers tire, a troupe of actors enters. Masks pressed to faces painted in vivid hues, they set up a makeshift stage on crates draped with cloth. Their leader in a crimson tunic calls for silence. They enact a brief play, a tyrant's decree sparks rebellion, and a humble hero rises to challenge oppression. Their voices fill the room, drawing patrons into the drama. The merchant clutching lost coins remembers travels. The farmer nods at each declaration of revolt. A juggler with sinewy arms tosses carved apples overhead, catching them deftly on the back of his neck. A fire eater ignites a match above oil, then draws the flame into his mouth, exhaling a plume of sparks that illuminates soot-streaked faces. Even the hardened gambler who lost his fortune lingers entranced. When the play concludes with the hero's triumph, applause surges. Coins sprinkle onto the stage, mingling bronze with tarnished silver and occasional gold. The actors bow smiles wide beneath feathered caps and slip into the chorus of cheers. The tavern keeper, leaning against the bar, nods with satisfaction. These moments of art maintain order, forging bonds no sword could cut. Amidst the revelry, a beggar pressed to the wall sips broth from a chipped bowl, eyes shining at each verse. A pair of apprentices from the forge tap mugs in quiet cadence, sharing plans to travel north in search of better metal. A cloaked stranger face half hidden traces a cracked dice cup as though pondering alliances whispered earlier. Each is drawn into the tapestry of performance. Two laborers' arms draped over each other's shoulders hum the minstrel's refrain as they exit toward the loft. Their work-hardened faces, once etched with worry, now glow. A merchant scribbles in a leather-bound book, noting rumors of tyranny into rumors he will sell at markets. The soldiers who grimaced at tales of fallen comrades earlier share laughter now buoyed by kinship. In a quieter corner, a young woman leans against the wall, tracing carvings on a bench, names and dates of past visitors, ghosts of tales untold. She sings along to the minstrel's final song, voice lifted high, her melody rippling through the crowd. A hush settles as she too becomes a performer bridging stage and audience. Nearby, a pair of lovers share a flicker of laughter as they trace patterns in spilled ale. Their future, once bound by arranged dowry and distant kin, seems bright against the backdrop of music and dance. He tucks a stray lock of hair from her face, and she smiles, knowing that in this night she holds both his heart and the promise of possibility. As midnight nears, the fire eater dims his flame, and the actors prepare to depart. The juggler tucks apples into his satchel, glancing toward the aging farmer who will offer him lodging. Musicians gather instruments, exchanging nods to return when wheat fields lie fallow next season. The minstrel loosens his lute strings and bows to the keeper before stepping into the chill night. Cookpots are scraped clean, and servers sweep ash and spilled grain from tables. Patrons drift toward the loft where straw-stuffed mattresses await. The clinking of mugs fades to a gentle hum as slumber overtakes the boisterous. A soldier stands tugging his cloak close, pausing to nod at a monk whose presence has softened hardened lines in his heart. Below the tavern keeper walks the empty hall footsteps echoing on creaking beams. He inspects the stage, noting a stray coin beneath a plank, an emblem of gratitude for the night's wonders. He lifts it and places it in the till, a promise that art will always have a home here. He extinguishes lanterns one by one until embers glow faint against darkened windows. In the silence, notes linger a song's echo, a hearth's crackle straw rustled by weary feet. Tomorrow, travelers will arrive with fresh tales, new sorrows, and desperate hopes. Tonight stands etched in memory a tapestry of melody and motion where each chord pierced hardship and each step danced despair to joy. Amid laughter and lingering echoes, the tavern revealed itself as more than refuge. It became a sanctuary of shared humanity under flickering light. Indeed, its warmth will always beckon again. As the final chords of the fiddle fade into a gentle hum, patrons begin to stir, shifting from the exuberance of dance to the weariness that settles over late hours. The minstrel's silent lute rests against a stool, its strings slack from the night's fervor. A lantern's glow gutters as the tavern keeper moves through the hall, inviting those who still linger to gather their belongings. In the corner, two laborers wipe sweat from their brows, the glow of shared song still flickering in their eyes. One claps a tired hand on the other's shoulder and whispers time to find straw, as though the very suggestion might dissolve the last threads of merriment. A cloaked traveler whose face was bright with laughter moments ago rises slowly. He brushes straw from his cloak and tucks a half-empty tankard beside his belt. His gaze sweeps across the rickety stairway leading to the loft above where thin mattresses lie like pale rectangles in the dimness. With a careful eye, he steps toward the beam that marks the stairwell's edge, one boot following the next until he finds the narrow planks. Each footfall creaks a muted drumbeat that presages the stillness of slumber rather than the clamoring revels below. Behind him, a farmer who had led the dance fumbles with the ties of his burlap pouch, counting coins that shone like bright sparks under lantern light. His wife still flushed from spinning. Under heated melodies rests a gentle hand on his forearm and murmurs, "We'll sleep well tonight." She takes a lantern from a hook on the wall and holds it aloft, casting a trembling beam onto the staircase's worn treads. He follows her lead boots, thudding softly until they reach the loft's threshold. Above, shafts of moonlight slant through narrow windows, illuminating a row of straw-stuffed mattresses. Each one bears the imprint of a traveler who slept the night before, lines of soot and faded stains telling stories of restless dreams. A laborer reluctant to part from his newfound friend's pads, barefoot across the uneven boards, and claims a corner mattress. He pats down straw, coaxing a small divot for his weary back, and stretches out as though easing into a warm mold. Beside him, a cloaked stranger slides onto his chosen bed, rolling off his damp cloak to reveal leather jerkin and travel-worn boots. He sets a sealed leather flask next to his head, as if it might protect him from nightmares that could follow the night's revelry. Below, the tavern keeper retrieves a broom and begins sweeping straw and spilled ale from floorboards, each sweep a rhythm that echoes the fading heartbeat of festivities. The pungent tang of smoked meat lingers in the air, mingling with the aroma of beer-soaked wood and the faint stench of sweat. He pauses only to extinguish candles, each flame snuffed with a soft hiss, until the entire hall lies in near darkness, save for the muted glow of a single lantern hung near the bar. Its light dances lazily across clusters of empty mugs and tangled chairs, reminding him that tomorrow's dawn will demand a fresh start. Upstairs, a monk in threadbare robes kneels beside a low window, his breath forming small clouds against the cool glass. He bows his head in silent prayer, offering thanks for the safety of this humble refuge. His figure is hollowed by days of fasting, yet tonight's shared song and dance have stirred a gentle hope within his chest. When his prayer concludes, he slips onto a narrow pallet, wrapping a thin blanket over his shoulders. The mattress creaks under his weight, but he settles into the stubborn straw, shutting his eyes against the distant echoes of laughter from earlier hours. In a battered leather pouch at his side, the cloaked scholar retrieves a small scrap of parchment. He glances at hastily scrawled notes, rumors pass from lips to eager ears, and tucks it back into the pouch as though the quiet darkness might keep those words from drifting away until dawn. Winding a threadbare cloak around himself, he closes his eyes, the cadence of last night's ballad still humming in his mind. For a moment he clings to the memory of applause and flickering lantern light, then allows sleep's embrace to carry him into oblivion. Below, a snore rises from a soldier, whose armor lies in a heap beside the hearth. His helmet now serves as a footstool for a visiting bard's lute case, and his gauntlets rest atop a battered shield. When his snoring halts, his eyes flutter open. He glances around the leap of revelry still fresh in his thoughts. He uncurls himself from a straw pallet, half seated, half leaning against a beam. The hush of midnight wraps around him, and he inhales the chill air before letting his body slide back into the mattress, surrendering to the promise of sleep. A young courtesan, whose painted face concealed both longing and pragmatism, emerges from under a gossamer cloak. She touches a ring on her finger, silver engraved with her mistress's crest, and hesitates before ascending the stairs. Her companions, two older courtesans who share a quilted blanket, watch her steady steps. In a moment of unguarded softness, she offers a faint smile to each, then climbs the narrow steps. The boards groan beneath her, a reminder that even the loft's heaviness struggles to remain silent. Once she reaches the top, she guides her boots to a fresh mattress near the edge, carefully arranged to catch the faintest light. She brushes stray strands of hair from her face and sinks onto the straw, closing her eyes as the night's warmth settles around her. Outside, the wind sighs through a gap in the roof, sending a loose thatch fluttering against the wooden frame. Moonlight slips beneath the door's edge, illuminating flecks of straw that have tumbled from the loft. The tavern keeper atop a wooden stool examines a tarnished penny left near the bar, a silent token of gratitude or perhaps a promise of tomorrow's return. He sets it aside in a small box beneath the countertop, then lights a single lantern to guide him upstairs. The beams creak as he mounts the stairs, each step precise. In the loft, he moves quietly between pallets, adjusting a stray blanket, smoothing straw back into place, and ensuring that no ember falls from a dying lantern to spark an unintended fire. His vigilance is unwavering even at this late hour, for he knows the safety of his guests is paramount, from the soldier's armor to the courtesan's painted cheeks. When he finishes his rounds, he douses the last lantern by pressing a hand against its flickering flame. The loft descends into a soft darkness pierced by the silver glow of moonlight. The hush is broken only by the faint rustle of straw as some sleepers shift beneath thin blankets, and the distant drip of water from a leaky gutter. The tavern keeper descends to the main hall, and with a final glance retreats to his private chamber behind the bar where straw and blankets wait. He extinguishes a small lamp, and his breathing eases as he surrenders to rest, knowing that tomorrow will demand an early stirring. Hours pass like slow breaths. In the loft, shadows stretch and contract as the moon makes its arc across the sky. The monk's sheet rattles when a chill breeze drifts through a gap in the shutter. He shifts, pulling the thin fabric closer, and subconsciously folds his hands across his chest. In his dreams, he returns to the quality of last evening's honeyed mead, a brief indulgence before the fast of dawn. Below, a dog curls against the hearth, its breathing steady as leftover embers faintly glow, casting a rust-tinted haze that mingles with the loft's cool stillness. Before the first crow of a distant rooster, a commotion unfolds. A damp noise like the scrabble of desperate claws rises from the far edge of the loft, where a lone traveler wakes with a start. He tries to sit, but his limbs threaten to betray him under the weight of deep sleep. He slides from the pallet mine blurry, and his boots slip on a patch of straw. With a grunt of frustration, he shakes his head, brushing damp hair from his eyes, and makes his way toward the stairwell, guided by the pale sliver of dawnlight seeping through the shutter gaps. Below, the monk is already rising. He kneels at a small basin of cold water in the corner, splashing his face with deliberate strokes. His hands tremble slightly, as though even this cold ritual challenges his frayed nerves. He clasps a piece of bread from a small bundle tucked near his mat, stale, hard as wood, yet comforting in its simplicity, and breaks it with careful hands. He eats in silence, mindful of each fragment that fills his hollow stomach. In the faint light, he recites a whispered verse, words of consolation for the traveler who stumbles toward the stairs, and for those who will soon gather around the hearth for the day's first warmth. As the traveler descends, his boots thud gently on the stairs. He emerges into a hall dimly lit by the first pale rays of sun. Smoke-scented boards creak underfoot. A laborer from a nearby table lifts a wooden bucket of cool water from the corner and spills it onto the floor, sending a ripple of liquid beneath the bench. The traveler splinters his boots onto the damp planks, sighing as the chill curls around his toes. He steps forward to a basin beneath a wall tap. Water dribbles in uneven spurts. He cups his hands and drinks greedily, blinking away the fog of sleep. Each sip washes away the haze of last night's revels, replacing it with the urgency of day's demands. The road ahead, the ledger he must fill the family he hopes to see before winter's chill truly sets in. A farmer emerges next, cloak thrown back, revealing a tunic stained with remnants of ale's sweetness. He carries a chipped bowl and a small wooden spoon. He pauses by the hearth where the embers from last night's fire have cooled to blackened ash. He lifts a long iron poker and prods the remnants of straw that lie scattered across the hearth's floor. A curl of smoke rises as a spark ignites, and he fans the wood to coax a flicker of flame. Sparks leap and embers glow softly in return. He kneels on one knee as he gathers kindling, whispering a short blessing for warmth, for sustenance, for the day's harvest to be enough. A nearby monk nods in silent approval before rising to fetch a new pail of water from the well. At the bar, the tavern keeper stands ready, jug in hand to pour a fresh pot of warm ale, noonday's gift, before bread and porridge arrive from the kitchen. His eyes travel over the stirring guests. A merchant unbuttons his travel cloak, revealing a vest still dusted with last night's sawdust. He rubs his palms together, as though willing the cold out of his fingers, and nods to the keeper. A laborer who lost his purse of coins in last night's games leans against the bar chin, resting on a gauntlet, and offers a wry smile. "1 cup for me, and I'll pay when the harvest comes," he says, voice rough, yet hopeful. The keeper pours the ale froth, hissing against the rim, and slides it across a scarred board. The laborer drinks slowly, savoring each sip, as though tasting the small miracle of warmth. From the loft, 2 apprentices descend, rubbing sleep from their eyes. They exchange a glance, noting the new day's pale light. One reaches for a small loaf of bread left behind by the cook, now hard as stone. He breaks it in half, pressing a fragment into the hand of his companion. They share it, and the stale bread's edges crumble against their thumbs. A laborer near the hearth offers them a scoop of thin pottage from a battered bowl, nodding in solidarity. They spoon it into their mouths, reluctant to pour more until they measure their hunger against the promise of work ahead. Beyond the bar, a group of travelers gathers near the hearth, trading last-minute advice about road conditions. The cloaked stranger, once silent and watchful, now speaks in measured tones of river fords and unstable bridges. A merchant leans in, eyes bright with anticipation, clutching a well-worn parchment map. "If you take the path through the foothills, you'll find fresh snow," says the stranger, voice low, yet steady. "But beyond the oak grove, you'll avoid the worst of the winter wind." Heads nod, and scribble notes, and thanks are given in earnest as each visitor departs the tavern's warmth for the chill that lies beyond. In the corner, the monk kneels once more, gathering his robes. He gathers a small sack of bread crusts left over from last night's pottage and ties it closed with a frayed string. He offers a silent blessing as he steps toward the exit, each footstep echoing through the emptying hall. Outside, dawn's gray light reveals frost on thatched roofs and a thin sheen atop muddy ruts. He breathes in the cold air, savoring its purity before reigniting his journey toward the next village's gate. At the bar, the tavern keeper counts coins, tallying yesterday's earnings and tonight's losses. He notes who owes what, who cannot pay, yet will return in autumn, and who vanished before settling debts. He sets aside a few fresh coins to secure barrels of ale, honey, and cider for the next season. A laborer approaches with a small wooden box of carved dice gifts to the keeper in thanks for last night's hospitality. The keeper accepts them with a nod, tucking them into a shallow drawer filled with trinkets and memories. He knows that soon the tavern will fill once more with laughter, song, and the clatter of dice. But for now, the hush of dawn brings solace in routine and readiness for what lies ahead. As travelers step into the morning mist, the tavern's hearth emits a final curl of smoke that drifts through the open doorway. The world beyond remains cold and unyielding, but within these walls warmth lingers born from shared stories, borrowed melodies, and the promise of another day's gathering. And even as the door swings closed behind the monk, the farmer and the cloaked stranger, the tavern keeper knows that tonight's embers fed by grain music and conversation will ignite again when shadows fall once more. When dawn's pale light filters through narrow windows, the tavern stirs. In the loft, travelers rise from straw-packed mattresses stretching sore limbs. A laborer ties worn boots and descends creaking stairs, bucket in hand to fetch cold well water. He pours it into a basin beneath a wall tap, sending ripples of chill across its chipped surface. Nearby, a cloaked scholar gathers crisp notes from last night's rumors, tucking them into a leather pouch before sipping warmed, spiced ale from a chipped mug. In the main hall, merchants emerge from the loft, cloaks dusted with straw. One adjusts a leather purse at his hip, the other brushes debris from his sleeves. They approach a long table where a clerk sets ink, quills, and fresh parchment. The clerk dips a feathered pen, then looks up as villagers in threadbare tunics step forward bearing bushels of golden barley. He tests grains, nods, and inscribes quantities in the ledger for the day's trades. His careful script captures each deal, bushels sold, coins exchanged, futures promised. Across the hall, a traveling spice merchant displays cloth sacks of pepper, cinnamon, and clove. Sunlight through the dusty window illuminates flecks of spice swirling in the air. A baker apron dusted with flour samples a pinch of clove, inhaling its warmth before placing several silver pennies on the table. With a curt nod, the spice merchant wraps the cloves in linen, eyes bright with satisfaction. Nearby, a weaver inspects bolts of linen dyed indigo and ochre. He runs fingertips over the fabric's tight weave, nods in approval, and offers payment. The cloth merchant exchanges the linen for coins, then watches the weaver wrap it around his arm and depart the material's deep color glowing beneath the rising sun. At a makeshift counter fashioned from an overturned barrel, an apothecary arranges tiny vials of tinctures and jars of dried herbs. A laborer with a fresh gash on his forearm approaches. The apothecary uncorks a jar of pale green salve, scoops a bit onto a rag, and presses it gently into raw flesh. The laborer winces, then exhales relief as the cooling ointment seeps in. Nearby, a young weaver trades cloth for a small vial of bitter tonic to soothe aching joints. Two knights in battered mail stand before a scribe near the hearth. One removes his helmet, revealing a beard flecked with soot. They spread a parchment displaying a baron's crest, debating whether to pledge men for a campaign. Their voices drop to hushed tones as the scribe's quill scratches ink across parchment, recording troop strengths and possible routes. When they finish, they pat the scribe's shoulder in thanks and depart decisions made for war or peace. In a quiet corner, a widow with 2 small children offers a tarnished bronze chalice to the tavern keeper. She hopes to exchange it for provisions. The keeper's gaze softens. He places a small leather purse on the table and gestures toward a pot of simmering pottage by the hearth. Grateful, she curtsies and settles her children on a bench to share meager bowls of warm broth. At the bar, the keeper pours warmed ale into wooden mugs for a local blacksmith and a pair of traveling merchants. Each receives a curt nod, ensuring coin accompanies need. The blacksmith tastes the ale to tame morning's chill before stoking his forge. One merchant pockets his purse before stepping outside to gather provisions. By mid-morning, the tavern's hall resembles a bustling market. Tables display salted fish, smoked cheese, and baskets of fresh eggs. A traveling dye merchant from distant lands exhibits woad and madder root. A bearded tinker measures lengths of rope and iron fittings for passing travelers. A small boy scampers between legs collecting stray coins to add to his father's modest purse. Across from the hearth, a pair of farmers negotiate grain prices with the clerk. Their hushed debate centers on weight and moisture, each convinced of fairness. A nod from the clerk settles the terms, and the farmers shake hands before departing to deliver a wagon of barley to a nearby mill. A glint of gold catches the eye of a cloaked stranger who approaches the clerk's table. He seeks directions to avoid bandit patrols rumored along a narrow pass. The clerk leans forward, drawing a simple map in charcoal, then instructs quietly on safer trails. The stranger presses a modest coin into his palm before slipping away to secure horses in the courtyard. Nearby, a weaver and a tanner barter bolts of linen for leather hides. They examine swatches, rubbing fingertips over surfaces before agreeing. The weaver locks cloth beneath an arm. The tanner stows hides in a canvas satchel. They shake hands and depart together, satisfied by their fair exchange. Later, 2 apprentices from the smithy scour the floor near the bar, discovering scraps of copper and bronze. They exchange thrilled whispers as they divide their unexpected treasure, planning to use it for small treats at dusk. Midday brings a rumble of wheels as a traveling merchant's cart arrives. He guides horses into the courtyard and ties them to a post. Onlookers press forward, inspecting wares, glass bottles of scented oils, dried fruits, and vibrant bolts of patterned cloth. The merchant offers samples in small bowls, sparking soft gasps as each scent and color reveals exotic promise. By early afternoon, deals conclude, and merchants pack wares. The spice merchant wraps remaining sacks in linen. The apothecary stashes empty vials in a leather satchel. The scribe closes his ledger, knotting it with twine, before slipping it beneath a bench. When the hall quiets, the tavern keeper extinguishes embers and sweeps scattered grain and pottery shards from the floor. He secures heavy doors against the evening chill, leaving a single lantern glowing by the bar. Outside, dusk settles across muddy roads and thatched rooftops. Inside, echoes remain the pulse of commerce, promises of tomorrow's trades, and memories of dawn's bustling hall, fading as twilight approaches. Soon the hall will awaken with visitors. As afternoon fades into dusk, the tavern shifts once more. The bustle of commerce stills as merchants and villagers drift toward the hearth coins secured in leather pouches. The cook stokes the embers under a black iron cauldron, stirring a savory stew of root vegetables and salted meat. Steam curls upward, carrying its rich aroma across worn floorboards and low beams. A farmer, weary from the day's toil, approaches the bar and rests a rough hand on the plank. A bowl of stew and ale, he says, voice thick with fatigue. The keeper nods, dipping a wooden ladle deep into the pot and filling a chipped bowl. Each spoonful warms the farmer's limbs, the earthy broth mingling with tender root notes. Nearby, 2 cloaked travelers return from their dealings, trailing dust and mist. They settle onto benches and break thick slices of barley bread into the stew, savoring each bite. Candle flames tremble in drafty windows, sending wavering light across faces, both familiar and foreign. A minstrel, lute in hand, takes his place near the hearth and draws a gentle chord that whispers through the smoky air. Conversations hush as patrons lean forward, mugs paused mid-raise, caught between hunger and melody. His warm tenor weaves a tale of loyalty shattered and honor reclaimed. When his final note fades, applause erupts, echoing off soot-darkened beams. Behind the bar, the keeper taps a fresh ale barrel. Pale foam surges into wooden mugs destined for eager hands. A blacksmith, lungs carrying grit from forging iron, raises his tankard in salute, then drinks deeply. The keeper's watchful gaze scans the room, ensuring ale's warmth unites rather than divides. Two knights emerge from a shadowed corridor, removing helmets and greaves with practiced ease. One perches on a stool at the bar, calling for honeyed mead. The keeper obliges, lifting a golden cask from near the hearth. The mead flows into a pewter flagon shimmering in candlelight. The knight sips carefully, warmth blooming across his chest. Nearby craftsmen lean in, trading news of ship arrivals and distant markets. A monk in simple robes rises from a corner bench, holding a bowl of porridge sweetened with honey. He steps lightly across the floorboards, offering nods to seated patrons, a silent reminder of devotion. Settling in a dim corner, he sips each spoonful with measured gratitude. Children of apprentices dart between benches, laughter rising like embers. They carry platters of cornmeal cakes drizzled with honey, offering them to patrons in exchange for a copper. When one merchant drops a coin into a child's waiting hand, the boy's eyes glow. That small piece of copper promises tomorrow's meal and another chance at warmth. Outside, a sudden gust rattles shutters as another minstrel appears at the threshold, cloak damp with evening chill. He knocks on the door boots, sending a swirl of straw across the floor. The keeper greets him with a nod and a mug of warmed ale, then invites him into the circle. Lute in hand, the minstrel draws a deep breath and begins a ballad of wanderers and fortune's fickle favor. At a corner table, ivory dice roll across a stool, clacking against worn wood. Laborers' faces dark with soot, and hands calloused press coins forward, eager for another chance. Each throw brings cheers or lamentations, fleeting ecstasy for winners and stoic acceptance for losers. Meanwhile, a cloaked stranger steps to the bar, satchel bulging with coins. "A bed in the loft," he says quietly. The keeper nods, accepting the satchel and gesturing to a narrow stairway tucked behind a partition. Steps creak beneath the stranger's weight as he ascends to the loft where straw-stuffed pallets lie waiting. He pauses at the threshold, inhaling the warm, ember-scented air, then settles onto rough straw, free from day's burdens. Below, the minstrel's melody returns, coaxing patrons to hum along. The blacksmith rises to dance despite stiff joints, stepping in time with a weaver whose hands bear fresh cuts. Laughter and joy weave new bonds among strangers, forging camaraderie in motion. As night deepens, the tavern's energy mellows. The cook ladles the final stew portions, and mugs receive their last fill of ale. A knight shakes a laborer's hand by the hearth, respect shining in marble-bright eyes. The monk tucks his empty bowl into a sack and dips a quiet head before departing into the chilly night. Merchants and travelers gather cloaks and packs, exchanging farewells as the keeper offers blessings of safe roads and good fortune. Upstairs, the stranger burrows into his straw pallet, drawn blankets rising with each breath. Candlelight seeps under eaves, illuminating his bundle of parchment and quill. In the loft's hush, the echo of ballads and promise of morning's hearth lulls him into sleep. Outside, wind howls through thatch, and frost glitters on the road. Within the tavern's sturdy walls cradle warmth and dreams. Below, the keeper sweeps stray straw and trampled ale from the floor, his broom whistling on worn boards. He counts coins with quiet satisfaction, the night's earnings enough to refill barrels and stave off winter's chill. He extinguishes candles, leaving only the hearth's ember as a beacon for wolves beyond the door. As dawn approaches soft as a whispered vow, the tavern will wake once more, ready to cradle another day's stories beneath its faithful beams. At that hour, the tavern's kitchen will kindle new fires and bowls of porridge will steam once more, promising warmth to early risers seeking solace from the cold. Before the first rays of sunrise spill through the narrow windows, the hearth's last ember cools to ash. The tavern keeper remains awake, tending a lone flicker that clings to life like a stubborn spark in a forest chill. He rises quietly from his bed of straw and walks beneath low beams where shadows pool like midnight water. Each step echoes upon wooden boards worn smooth by countless footsteps. He pauses beside a barrel of ale tapped the night before, jotting notes in a small leather-bound ledger. In the loft above, travelers shift on straw-packed mattresses. A cloaked scholar rolls from a sleep, heavy with dreams of distant courts. He gathers his parchment, smoothing creases that carry the weight of rumors passed from one eager ear to another. With careful hands, he unties his satchel, revealing quills and ink. He dips a quill into a pot of ink light and records recollections of last night's ballads and bargains. His whisper is faint, drowned by the hush of dawn. Downstairs, a hooded figure descends the narrow stairs, footsteps uncertain in the half-light. It is the traveling minstrel whose lute rests against a stool where it fell hours ago. He rubs tired eyes and retrieves his lute. He strums a chord that resonates softly, reminding him that even as the tavern sleeps, music remains a constant hum beneath its walls. He lifts a small cup of ale the keeper left by the bar, swallowing a lukewarm sip that carries notes of barley and wood smoke. Outside the door, a dog curls against the stone threshold, nose tucked into paws. As sunrise warms his fur, he lifts his head and presses his muzzle against the air-tasting remnants of last night's revelry. When he rises, his paws thump against the floorboard as he follows the minstrel back inside. The keeper nods to the animal before kneeling to gather embers in a metal shovel. He carries them toward the hearth. With practiced strokes, the keeper blows gentle breaths into the coal, coaxing a fragile flame to life. Sparks swirl like golden dust as the hearth warms to glowing red. As the fire crackles, he warms a clay pot of water. Nearby, a small iron kettle begins to hum as it heats. He removes a wooden ladle and dips it into the kettle, letting steam drift across his face like a whispered promise of warmth. A laborer stirs from his pallet back, aching from straw and watchful refusal to sleep until need demanded rest. He shuffles down the stairs and stretches in front of the hearth. The early chill bites, yet the soft glow steadies his breath. He laces heavy boots and approaches the bar. "A cup of porridge, please," he rasps. The keeper ladles thick oats into a wooden bowl, topping them with a spoonful of honey drawn from last season's stores. The laborer lifts his bowl to the fire's edge and sips carefully, each spoonful restoring strength. From the loft, a monk descends, robes dragging faintly on the floor. He carries a leather satchel of bread crusts and dried herbs. Each step is measured as though he fears to break the tavern's fragile silence. At the bar, he offers a soft bow. "A blessing for those who sleep," he murmurs. The keeper nods in return, handing the monk a small loaf broken from yesterday's batch. The monk tucks the loaf into his satchel, alongside herbs for medicine, and steps outside. A hush greets him, broken only by his bare sandals brushing the cold floor. In the courtyard, mist cloaks wagons and horses. The monk finds a weathered wall and kneels. He murmurs a prayer for travelers, for those who sow and reap, for children whose laughter echoes in dreams. His eyes drift to the road where shadows recede as sunlight blossoms. He rises, tucks his satchel over his shoulder, and moves toward the chapel gate, leaving behind the tavern's straw and smoke for the promise of wanderings. Back inside, a weaver creeps down the stairs, weaving in a circle the nights of labor that seemed endless. She presses her hand to her side, feeling the stir of life carried within her womb. The hush of dawn eases her mind. She approaches the hearth where the kettle's steam has risen to a gentle boil. With a careful hand, she retrieves a dried fig from her pouch, breaking it in half and pressing the halves into the hot water. As the fruit softens, juices swirl into a sweet infusion. She cups the aromatic broth, letting warmth soak her fingers before sipping. The taste is gentle, seasoned by memory and hope. A blacksmith emerges slowly. His face is streaked by soot and exhaustion. He descended last night, his heavy limbs guided by the promise of ale and laughter. Now he looks upon the quiet hall with softer eyes. He approaches the hearth, shoulders slumped. He moves a poker to prod embers, wishing for a stronger flame. The keeper offers him a piece of salted fish, its cured flavor enough to stave off hunger. The blacksmith nods in gratitude and sinks onto a stool, savoring each bite before leaning back to let warmth soak into his bones. Soon the tavern door creaks, admitting the first straggler of morning. A cloaked traveler whose satchel is light approaches the bar. In his hands he holds a crumpled coin purse. He opens it, counting a single copper penny. The keeper notices and offers a reassuring nod. In return, the traveler places the penny on the counter and asks for a small cup of water. The keeper nods and pours from a clay jug into a chipped wooden mug. The traveler drinks slowly, his face creased with weariness, but lit by relief. He tucks the empty mug beside his footprints in straw, gathering courage to continue his journey. Illumination grows, revealing details once masked by shadow. Tables bear chips and scratches, each mark a memento of feasts and fights. A shelf over the hearth holds charred logs stacked for the next night's fire. Kettles and pots hang from iron hooks, awaiting fresh meals. Baskets of root vegetables line a corner, their rough skins hinting at stews to come. The tavern's wooden floor reveals scuffs where chairs scraped and dancers twirled. Every detail speaks to yesterday's revel, yet now offers promise for tomorrow's company. Across from the bar, a widow descends the stairs. Her children rest under a single blanket, mouths curled in slumber. She kneels beside a small chest next to a pallet and removes a tarnished brooch. She places it on the bar. The keeper recognizes its craftsmanship. Delicate filigree silver glint dulled by soot. He knows its value and offers her a bowl of thick porridge and a jug of cider whenever she returns. The widow's eyes shine. She lifts her children and gathers them close, forging a hug that speaks of relief more precious than coin. In a shadowed alcove, a traveling spice merchant kneels. From inside his coat, he withdraws a small sack of pepper, cinnamon, and saffron. He places them on the floor, offering them to the keeper in silent gratitude. The keeper accepts, nodding and sliding a cup of spiced ale toward the merchant. The merchant's fingers tremble as he raises the cup. The spiced warmth dissolves fatigue, and he offers a soft word of thanks, his trades made debts owed essentials, procured for another road ahead. By mid-morning, the tavern's rhythm shifts. The hearth crackles in earnest flames dancing along cold stones. The kettle's hum has given way to the cook's stirring of a new stew, lentils, and cured veal thickening to feed midday wanderers. A barrel of fresh ale is tapped and wooden mugs cheerfully clink as laborers gather to barter story and coin. Merchants from distant roads drift through the door, awakened by the hiss of stew and the promise of shelter. On a bench near the hearth, a young squire peers down at a letter sealed with wax. He breaks the seal and reads fast orders to join a contingent bound for distant terrain, a call to arms that will lead him into unknown trials. As he reads, his gloved hand trembles, steel at his side, jingling softly. He folds the parchment and places it in his tabard. Rising, he steps into the morning's light, determined to see duty fulfilled before the next harvest. Outside, the tavern yard breathes with life. A farmer checks his tethered horse, running a hand along its neck as it stirs. He plans to head toward the northern fields where frost threatens late barley. A traveling mime arrives at the open door, cheeks flushed by morning's chill. He carries a battered puppet stage upon his back.
The keeper beckons him inside, eager to reserve space for afternoon's entertainment. The mime bows, then begins arranging wooden planks and cloth to create a miniature stage, the promise of laughter to follow.
On the bar's edge, the keeper wipes a few stray crumbs and splatters of stew. He counts coins from last night's wages enough to replenish grain stores and stock a fresh barrel of ale before evening's revel. He tucks the coins into a leather pouch and secures it beneath the counter. His gaze wanders upward, following the path of beams that once bore dancers' weight and minstrels' melodies. He breathes deeply, drawing strength from the knowledge that dawn, like every tide, returns faithful promise of life within these walls. Late afternoon sun slants through narrow windows as the tavern adopts a new rhythm. The morning's bustle has given way to a steady hum. A cook stirs a cauldron of lentil stew over the hearth embers crackling beneath. The rich aroma drifts over benches where patrons lean close. A traveler descends from the loft, nodding to a monk sipping barley broth in the corner. Their brief acknowledgement recalls dawn's prayers before the day's tasks continue. A merchant in a forest green cloak approaches the bar coins, jingling in a leather purse. He requests a bowl of stew and a mug of watered ale. The keeper ladles steaming stew into a wooden bowl, then pours ale from a tapped barrel. At a long table, a farmer breaks rye bread into his bowl, sharing news of the upcoming harvest. Beside him, a tinker describes a simple latch he hopes to peddle. Each bite renews strength for their respective labors. By the hearth, two blacksmith apprentices share a mug. Their scorched aprons reflect morning's labor at the forge. One inspects a forged horseshoe's curve, ensuring balance, while the other sips spiced ale. They speak of tomorrow's welding project in which client will need new plowshares. Each sip reminds them that trade and craft bind all who gather here. A pair of young widows sit side by side, children asleep in the loft above. Each holds a bowl of stew warmth, seeping through their fingers. They exchange hushed concerns about market days ahead, wondering if coin from dawn's labor can last through winter's lean months. One recalls trading a silver locket for bread that morning. Now, midday's stew offers not only sustenance, but a moment of shared comfort amid uncertainty. A traveling mime emerges near the hearth, assembling a simple wooden stage. Children pause mid-bite, drawn to his silent artistry. He balances on one foot, mimes lifting an invisible burden, then juggles imaginary apples with exaggerated flair. Laughter ripples as patrons toss coppers into his hat. Even the farmer and tinker lean forward, caught by each gesture. Nearby, a spice merchant opens a crate of cinnamon and saffron. A baker offers a silver penny for saffron to bake sweet cakes tonight. The merchant wraps it in cloth, and the baker vows to share loaves with those unable to afford spice. Their exchange embodies the tavern's quiet commerce goods, traded not only for coin, but for friendship. A knight-indented male slides onto a bench, removing gauntlets with care. He unfolds a parchment bearing wax seals, offering it to two clerks. They lean close, discussing alliances forming between neighboring lords. The knight traces a finger along a rough map of forests and rivers. Their hushed debate carries the weight of politics, poised to ripple beyond these walls. As midday wanes, the cook scrapes the final stew from the cauldron, stacking bowls near a drying rail. She calls for firewood to stoke the hearth for evening's feast. A stable boy enters with kindling, setting it beside smoldering embers. Sparks rise as the cook arranges logs. Soon, salted pork and root vegetables will roast their aroma, drawing weary travelers from the yard. Outside, the door swings as a cloaked traveler returns to collect his satchel. The scholar from earlier finishes a quick prayer, then departs to chart a route for dawn. Inside, the cook slides platters of roast pork and glazed vegetables across tables. Patrons reach eagerly, mugs held aloft to receive fresh ale drawn from a second barrel. A butcher arrives with additional meat, setting a tray where laborers gather. Children once asleep in the loft now watch wide-eyed as the aroma of roast fills the hall. They tug at parents' hands, eager for tender morsels. The traveling spice merchant returns, offering a pinch of cumin to deepen the roast's flavor. The cook blesses the gift-stirring spices into the bubbling pot. A weaver, his fingers still stained with dye, sits near the hearth, sipping ale while mending a bolt of linen. He glances at the spice merchant, imagining sweet cakes to come. A pair of soldiers shares a bench greaves propped beside a battered shield. They break rye bread, dipping it into hearty drippings before discussing patrol routes and whispered bandit rumors along the eastern pass. A traveling minstrel enters, lute in hand. Depositing a copper in the mime's hat, he lifts his instrument and strikes a chord that ripples through the crowd. The knight raises a flagon of honeyed mead, toasting the hearth as strings launch into a ballad of valor and return. Patrons lean close, eyes glimmering, letting melody weave between the tables and timbered rafters. A baker steps forward with sweet cake spiced by saffron and cinnamon. Children rush their laughter, echoing like soft bells. The baker shares extra loaves with the widows, their faces brightening with every crumb. Outside, twilight drapes rooftops in violet haze and horses nicker softly. The stable hand finishes evening chores beneath flickering lanterns. Inside, a hush follows the minstrel's final note, replaced by murmured thanks from those whose feasting lingers. By early evening, the tavern pulses with life. Plates piled with roast root vegetables and sweet cakes circle benches. Mugs overflow with frothy ale. Each cheer cements camaraderie. The minstrel reprises a lively jig, coaxing bodies to sway and tap. The forge's distant echo merges with foot stomps, binding craft and celebration into a shared tapestry of warmth. A butcher sets a final platter on a side table, then bows before departing. The scholar pens closing thoughts on afternoon's commerce and camaraderie. The knight and clerks finalize plans under lamp glow, their voices carrying quiet resolve. The spice merchant gathers his wares, offering a small pouch of ginger to the cook as thanks. With a final prayer, the monk blesses the evening's feast, kneeling briefly to share bread with young apprentices who will deliver it to families in need. As stars emerge, the tavern's fire roars against the chill beyond its sturdy walls. Patrons lean back in chairs, bellies full, hearts warmed by shared song and solidarity. The cook extinguishes embers, knowing that fresh stew and rising bread await dawn. Beyond the threshold, night deepens outside. A final candle flickers as a patron bids the stable hand farewell. The tavern keeper pauses, rifling through a small pouch of coins from the day's earnings, reflecting that tomorrow's dawn will bring new travelers and fresh stories, his hearth ever ready to welcome them. Amen. Truly. Print len, content for. Split. Late afternoon sun slants through narrow windows as the tavern adopts a new rhythm. The morning's bustle has given way to a steady hum. A cook stirs a cauldron of lentil stew over the hearth, embers crackling beneath. The rich aroma drifts over benches where patrons lean close. A traveler descends from the loft, nodding to a monk sipping barley broth in the corner. Their brief acknowledgement recalls dawn's prayers before the day's tasks continue. A merchant in a forest green cloak approaches the bar, coins jingling in a leather purse. He requests a bowl of stew and a mug of watered ale. The keeper ladles steaming stew into a wooden bowl, then pours ale from a tapped barrel. At a long table, a farmer breaks rye bread into his bowl, sharing news of the upcoming harvest. Beside him, a tinker describes a simple latch he hopes to peddle. Each bite renews strength for their respective labors. By the hearth, two blacksmith apprentices share a mug. Their scorched aprons reflect morning's labor at the forge. One inspects a forged horseshoe's curve, ensuring balance, while the other sips spiced ale. They discuss tomorrow's welding project and which client will need new plowshares. Each sip reminds them that trade and craft bind all who gather here. A pair of young widows sit side by side, children asleep in the loft above. Each holds a bowl of stew, warmth seeping through their fingers. They exchange hushed concerns about market days ahead, wondering if coin from dawn's labor can last through winter's lean months. One recalls trading a silver locket for bread that morning. Now, midday stew offers not only sustenance, but a moment of shared comfort amid uncertainty.
A traveling mime emerges near the hearth, assembling a simple wooden stage. Children pause mid-bite, drawn to his silent artistry. He balances on one foot, mimes lifting an invisible burden, then juggles imaginary apples with exaggerated flair. Laughter ripples as patrons toss coppers into his hat. Even the farmer and tinker lean forward, caught by each gesture.
Nearby, a spice merchant opens a crate of cinnamon and saffron. A baker offers a silver penny for saffron to bake sweet cakes tonight. The merchant wraps it in cloth, and the baker vows to share loaves with those unable to afford spice. Their exchange embodies the tavern's quiet commerce goods, traded not only for coin, but for friendship.
A knight in dented mail slides onto a bench, removing gauntlets with care. He unfolds a parchment bearing wax seals, offering it to two clerks. They lean close, discussing alliances forming between neighboring lords. The knight traces a finger along a rough map of forests and rivers. Their hushed debate carries the weight of politics, poised to ripple beyond these walls.
As midday wanes, the cook scrapes the final stew from the cauldron stacking bowls near a drying rail. She calls for firewood to stoke the hearth for evening's feast. A stable boy enters with kindling, setting it beside smoldering embers. Sparks rise as the cook arranges logs. Soon salted pork and root vegetables will roast their aroma, drawing weary travelers from the yard. Outside, the door swings as a cloaked traveler returns to collect his satchel. A few patrons nod as he departs. The scholar from earlier rises quietly and follows him outside, parchment tucked away. Inside, the cook slides platters of roast pork and glazed vegetables across tables. Patrons reach eagerly, mugs held aloft to receive fresh ale drawn from a second barrel. A butcher arrives with additional meat, setting a tray where laborers gather. Children once asleep in the loft now watch wide-eyed as the aroma of roast fills the hall. They tug at parents' hands, eager for tender morsels. The traveling spice merchant returns, offering a pinch of cumin to deepen the roast's flavor. The cook blesses the gift, stirring spices into the bubbling pot. A weaver, his fingers still stained with dye, sits near the hearth, sipping ale while mending a bolt of linen. He glances at the spice merchant, imagining sweet cakes to come. A pair of soldiers shares a bench greaves propped beside a battered shield. They break rye bread, dipping it into hearty drippings before discussing patrol routes and whispered bandit rumors along the eastern pass. A traveling minstrel enters, lute in hand. Depositing a copper in the mime's hat, he lifts his instrument and strikes a chord that ripples through the crowd. The knight raises a flagon of honeyed mead, toasting the hearth as strings launch into a ballad of valor and return. Patrons lean close, eyes glimmering, letting melody weave between the tables and timbered rafters. A baker steps forward with sweet cakes spiced by saffron and cinnamon. Children rush their laughter, echoing like soft bells. The baker shares extra loaves with the widows, their faces brightening with every crumb. Outside, twilight drapes rooftops in violet haze and horses nicker softly. The stable hand finishes evening chores beneath flickering lanterns. Inside, a hush follows the minstrel's final note, replaced by murmured thanks from those whose feasting lingers. By early evening, the tavern pulses with life. Plates piled with roast root vegetables and sweet cakes circle benches. Mugs overflow with frothy ale. Each cheer cements camaraderie. The minstrel reprises a lively jig, coaxing bodies to sway and tap. The forge's distant echo merges with foot stomps, binding craft and celebration into a shared tapestry of warmth. A butcher sets a final platter on a side table, then bows before departing. The knight and clerks finalize plans under lamp glow. The spice merchant gathers his wares, offering a small pouch of ginger to the cook as thanks. With a final prayer, the monk blesses the evening's feast, kneeling briefly to share bread with young apprentices who will deliver it to families in need. As stars emerge, the tavern's fire roars against the chill beyond its sturdy walls.
Patrons lean back in chairs, bellies full, hearts warmed by shared song and solidarity. The cook extinguishes embers, knowing that fresh stew and rising bread await dawn. Beyond the threshold, night deepens outside. A final candle flickers as a patron bids the stable hand farewell. The tavern keeper pauses, rifling through a small pouch of coins from the day's earnings, reflecting that tomorrow's dawn will bring new travelers and fresh stories, his hearth ever ready to welcome them. Amen. Truly. As the evening feast winds down and the last echoes of laughter simmer into soft conversation, the tavern assumes a gentler pace. Flames in the hearth gutter and spills shadows along the walls, illuminating faces both familiar and foreign. A minstrel's cheerful ballad has given way to quieter melodies, and patrons lean in toward one another to share whispered confidences. A sturdy oak table scuffed by countless feasts now bears the empty remnants of platters, and mugs tipped to their final drops of ale. At one corner, a burly soldier cradles a chipped tankard, sipping the final dregs of ale. Each swallow warms him against the night's chill, and he leans back, wiping his mouth with the back of a leathery hand. His polished helm rests on the floor at his feet, revealing a face streaked with soot and the weariness of recent skirmishes. He surveys the hall with measured calm, noting the relaxed figures of other patrons, the miner whose cheeks still glow with merriment, the weaver tracing idle patterns on a scrap of cloth at his side. In this soft half-light, memories of last night's revelry drift like ash on still air. Nearby, a traveling apothecary, whose hands had earlier drawn salves for aching muscles, leans against the bar. He traces the edge of a small glass vial containing mint leaf oil, inhaling deeply. The jar's aroma offers a soothing counterpoint to the smoky air. He lets the varnished wood of the counter cradle his elbow, listening, as the tavern keeper exchanges quiet words with a lady cloaked in twilight blue. She presses a folded slip of parchment into his hand. Her final request directions to a distant abbey that will offer sanctuary and comfort before the next day's long miles. The keeper nods, reciting routes that wind between river fords and forest glades. Down a narrow corridor leading to the loft, a pair of apprentices move with cautious grace, carefully balancing bowls of porridge on a tray. They aim for hungry patrons who linger above finishing the day's last meal. A traveler who once scribbled maps now sits cross-legged by the hearth, dipping a crust of bread into his bowl of porridge, the steam rising like mist in a quiet morning. His fingers tremble slightly. He measures each bite with the same precision he used to chart unsteady roads. Nearby, a cloaked tinker summons the courage to offer his wares, a simple latch that in the right hands can turn a humble door into a sturdy barrier against night's threats. In a dark corner behind a cluster of barrels stands a cloaked stranger. He remains motionless save for the shallow rise and fall of his chest beneath rough linen. His eyes, sharp and watchful, catch the flicker of every lamp. He traces the rim of a pewter cup with his fingertip, recalling the weight of each coin spilled in chance and battle. He knows that in this tavern's embrace of shadow, secrets are as plentiful as spilled ale. If he listens closely, he might discern whispers of clandestine pacts or plans to move contraband along hidden routes. Beyond the tavern's hearthlit walls, the night brims with the promise of quiet transactions that will shape many fates. A band of musicians convenes near the hearth, gathering string instruments and a small drum. Though the revelry has softened, the urge for night's final melody lingers. One by one they raise their bows, coaxing a gentle lament that drifts through the hall. Soft as a dying ember, the music threads around tables, eliciting nods and sighs. A haggard, barred face lined by years on the road draws a deep breath and adds a mournful verse. Patrons close their eyes, letting the melody carry them beyond the tavern's four walls into memories of loss, love, and hopes yet unfulfilled. The tavern keeper moves among those few who remain, collecting empty cups and easing trembling barrels back toward their shelves.
Each child of dusk that he tends, whether a tankard of ale or a bowl of stew, reflects his stewardship. At his shoulder hangs a small leather pouch containing the evening's receipts. He rubs his wrist thoughtfully, contemplating the delicate balance between hospitality and order. He knows that one spilled mug can ignite tempers, yet one shared meal can forge alliances stronger than steel. With each gentle exhortation to move quietly or to leave gently, he guides travelers towards slumber, ensuring the night passes without discord. Behind the bar, a simmering pot now rests on smoldering coals, its late-night stew reduced to hunks of smoky meat and root vegetables. The cook leans a gentle shoulder against the stone hearth, catching her breath. Her apron bears flecks of seasoning from countless pots, and her hands bear the calluses of routine labor. She keeps vigil over the flame, ensuring that at a moment's notice she can rouse the embers and feed any stragglers still wandering through the hearth-lit gloom. Should the hour demand a fresh bowl of hot broth, she stands ready to stir and ladle, offering nourishment to the lost and weary alike. In the loft, a pair of travelers emerge from the shadows. They stretch as they descend the narrow stairs, each movement deliberate in the low light. One carries a faded cloak, its edges fraying from constant use. The other cradles a wooden staff, its carved handle shaped like a sturdy oak branch. At the foot of the stairs, they pause, allowing their eyes to adjust to the lamplight. A gracious nod passes between them, and the keeper who gestures toward a pair of battered blankets piled on a bench. "Warmth for your bones," he murmurs, voice low, yet kindly. They accept the blankets and settle onto pallets of straw, each grateful for shelter from night's chill. On a nearby bench, a cloaked minstrel closes his eyes, lulled by the final lullaby of strings. He recalls earlier performances, flickering smiles, coins tossed into a hat, the hush that followed each verse. He knows his duty was more than entertainment. In this hall of burnt timber and smoky stone, his music stitched the torn edges of solitude. He rises now, cradling his lute, and moves toward the door. The hush deepens as he steps into the night's quiet, leaving behind the tavern's hearth to forge his own path beneath the moon's pale glow. A moment later, the door creaks open once more to admit a weary pilgrim. He pauses on the threshold, eyes drawn to the hearth's failing glow. The keeper greets him with a nod and guides him to a low bench by the fire's edge. There the pilgrim settles, unburdening a satchel of simple rations, bread-dried figs, and a small crust of cheese. He sets them before the keeper, who stirs embers until they glow anew. A fresh bowl of broth materializes with soothing speed, and the pilgrim murmurs gratitude, tasting warmth that has long been forgotten on distant roads. As midnight approaches, the tavern shrinks to a handful of souls. A blacksmith boots caked in ash sits hunched over a wooden stool, each breath a low rumble of weariness. He grips a tankard of warmed cider in both hands, savoring the spice-laced nectar. His eyes drift shut, and for a moment the clang of hammer on anvil seems distant, as though the forge itself sleeps in solidarity. Outside, wind rattles shutters and carries the hush of distant owls. Inside, the hearth responds with gentle crackles, embers releasing warmth that seeps into chilled bones. At the bar, two cloaked figures engage in quiet negotiation. One bears a satchel sewn with secret pockets. The other glances around, mind sharpened by suspicion and necessity. Their voices, soft as rustling leaves, discuss routes to evade toll collectors, sharing knowledge of hidden fords and isolated trails. When terms are settled, a purse slides across the smooth wood. It lands with a muted thud, copper coins clinking softly, before settling into a muted hush. The transaction complete, they dissolve into the night's shadows, each bearing knowledge that may shape fortunes or seal fates. In a dim corner, a pair of children wash the night's grease from the tail of a sleepy hound. Each stroke of their cloth reveals tawny fur soft beneath small hands. The dog yawns and licks a child's cheek, as though offering thanks, a moment of innocence amid the hush.
One child, head thick with curls, sneaks a piece of breadcrumbs from a hidden pocket. She slips it to the dog, whose tail thumps faintly against the floor. The hush becomes gentler still, as though the tavern itself recognizes that even in darkness, warmth endures in the simplest acts of care.
Finally, as the moon's pale glow climbs overhead, the tavern keeper moves to extinguish the last lantern. He presses a palm against its trembling flame, and with a soft hiss, darkness settles like a velvet cloak. The hearth's embers dim to glowing coals, painting embers red beneath tired faces. He pauses in the bar's center, listening to the soft breaths and muffled snores. Each ember represents a life held in balance, traveler, pilgrim soldier, weaver minstrel, and so many more. With a silent nod, he turns to lock the heavy door, ensuring no drifting wind can steal away the fragile peace. Beneath the rafters, the tavern stands guardian over the night's vigil, offering shelter to each soul seeking rest until dawn's first ember ignites once more. When the moon slips below the horizon and the faintest blush of dawn tinges the eastern sky, the tavern keeper rises from his chamber before the first call of the cockerel. He moves with deliberate care through corridors still thick with night's hush. The embers in the hearth have cooled to gray ash, and the lanterns that flickered against the shadows last night stand cold and dark, their glass panes dusty. He pauses a moment by the bar, placing a weathered slate inscribed with yesterday's tally into a small wooden box. He closes it carefully, sealing away the record of coins, exchange promises made, and debts forgiven under shelter of these walls. Descending the narrow staircase into the main hall, he draws a deep breath, savoring the quiet before the day's storm of voices. The floorboards creak beneath his worn leather boots as he crosses beneath low beams that still bear stray flecks of midnight soot. In one corner, a tattered cloak hangs over a bench, evidence of a traveler who sought refuge here until first light. He collects the cloak, gently draping it over a hook by the door, mindful that the cloak's owner may return when the world is ablaze with dawn's full radiance. Near the hearth, he kneels to sweep ash into an iron pan. Tiny sparks rise, dancing across his fingers before vanishing. He scatters kindling in a loose pattern, then carefully strikes flint against steel to coax a flame. The ember blazes to life, and he tends it like a guardian, guiding the flame until it laps confidently at fresh logs. The hearth's glow pushes back lingering shadows, illuminating walls dappled by smoke stains and the faint grain of aged timbers. He steps back, allowing the warmth to fill the room, knowing that soon travelers will emerge from upstairs and down the lane, seeking both comfort and sustenance before venturing onward. Footsteps rouse from the loft above, and a traveler descends with measured steps. He bears a staff carved by his own hand, its surface worn smooth by miles walked. He pauses at the foot of the stairs, inhaling the tavern's waking aroma, a gentle mixture of wood smoke, damp straw, and the faint sweetness of last night's stew clinging to cracked bowls left beside pallets. He greets the keeper with a nod, and the keeper in turn fills a chipped wooden mug with warm water drawn from a simmering kettle. The traveler cradles it between calloused palms, closing his eyes as steam rises and mists the chill from his lungs. In another corner, the monk who spent the night in silent prayer stirs and descends. His robes brush damp floorboards as he approaches the newly lit hearth. He lowers himself to one knee and bows his head, murmuring a quiet blessing for the day's first flame. He offers a small piece of bread left over from last evening's feast, placing it among coals to warm a humble votive to the promise of life that fire represents. As the bread's edge browns, he lifts it into his hands and breaks it, then consumes it in gentle bites, each morsel a prayer that passes from throat to earth. Nearby, a blacksmith's apprentice emerges from the loft, each breath exhaled in soft clouds. He shakes straw from his tunic, then fiddles with the clasp on his satchel. Inside lie tools for mending horseshoes and nails for wagon repairs. He approaches the bar where the keeper pours a thick, creamy porridge into a wooden bowl. The apprentice accepts it with gratitude, allowing steam to rise until it warms his face. While he eats, the keeper,
stokes embers beneath a large iron cauldron, preparing to cook a fresh batch of barley gruel for hungry early risers. A noise at the door draws attention as a cloaked figure enters with haste, the traveling spice merchant from the previous afternoon, returning now before sunrise. He carries a small box carved from oak, its lid secured with a simple latch. He sets it on the bar and opens it to reveal vials of exotic spices, nutmeg, cardamom, and delicate strands of saffron. He offers a small tray 2 tiny sachets of cinnamon in exchange for a bowl of porridge now, and a promise to return at midday with fresh shipments for those who slept through yesterday's bustle. The keeper nods in approval, scooping porridge into a bowl for the merchant, and tucking cinnamon into a leather pouch. They exchange a brief handshake before the merchant slips back into the dawn's cool haze. Along a row of empty crates, the cloaked scholar from nights past emerges brushing dew from a parchment scroll still pinned to his tabard. He places the scroll on a nearby table and uses a drop of ink to refine lines marking hidden roads and safe havens. His quill moves swiftly, capturing details gleaned from hushed conversations by candlelight, the strength of river currents along the western ford, the toll rates exacted by rival barons, and whispered plans of caravans bound for distant markets. Each stroke of ink ensures that knowledge travels beyond the tavern's walls, guiding future wanderers as lanterns guide footsteps in darkness. As the hearth's glow steadies, the tavern door swings open once more, admitting a group of farmers who spent the night in nearby fields. Their breath comes in rhythmic puffs as they approach the bar boots, leaving muddy trails. Each holds a sack of fresh eggs tightly to his chest. One farmer, his face scarred by wind-whipped journeys, grins and asks for bowls of porridge. The keeper obliges, ladling warm gruel rife with oat gnarl and sweetened by a spoonful of honey. They break eggs into small baskets, preserving them for trade or breakfast at home. While they eat, they exchange stories how the cattle fair thrived despite last season's drought, and how the construction of a new bridge promises to ease the traveler's burden. At a bench near the hearth, a widow appears guiding 2 small children still wrapped in blankets. She carries a battered wooden bowl, and with solemn grace offers it to the keeper. He fills it with barley gruel, placing a small crust of bread atop. The widow bows deeply, pressing her palms together in thanks, and she marshals her children to a bench by the fire's edge. As they eat, their eyes reflect embers dancing in quiet wonder. The widow watches them, worry etched on her brow. Provisions are scant, and this morning's meal is both lifeline and precious grace. A moment's hush falls as the cook emerges from the back kitchen, wiping flour from her apron. She carries a basket of fresh eggs and a sack of goat's milk. She sets them beside the hearth and heads toward a workbench where she rolls dough into thick rounds. Soon, loaves of barley bread will bake within the stone hearth's belly, their crusts blistering to golden brown. She hums a low tune, recalling the baker's words from yesterday, sharing bread with those unable to afford spice-laden cakes. Today her offerings will nourish without adornment, simple sustenance for every path-worn soul who enters. The tavern keeper retrieves a small stool and ascends to a high shelf where he stores wooden mugs and sturdy jugs. He arranges them with care-lining rows so that each handle faces outward, ready to be seized. Below, 2 cloaked figures slip inside, a pair of craftspeople one, a weaver the other, a tanner who seek a moment's respite before trade resumes. They approach the bar and order mugs of warmed ale, the malt's bitterness, a welcome embrace before their own tasks call. They exchange nods as they drink, discussing yesterday's negotiations over cloth bolts and leather hides, each pleased with their gains and the promise of tomorrow's negotiations. From the corridor beyond, a minstrel who has returned with the sun's first light appears, stringing his lute across a shoulder. He steps into the hall with a soft smile, bowing to the keeper. The keeper offers him a small bowl of porridge, and the minstrel accepts, setting his lute aside. He takes a seat by the hearth, listening to crackling embers like old friends reflecting on the sharing of last night's final lullabies. In a brief moment of reflection, he recalls the musicians who joined him, each bow stroke, each finger pluck weaving memory between timbers. Now, as a new day begins, he savors the sanctuary the tavern offers before he resumes his wandering path. In the corner beneath a low window, two apprentices from the smithy settle at a small table. They crack eggs into a bowl, adding a pinch of salt to scramble before the embers. One stirs gently, careful not to burn, while the other sets a ladle of thick broth in place. As they eat, their discussion turns to the forge's demands. Today they must quench a batch of steel blades by midday, an order from a knight resuming patrol. Each young apprentice draws strength from the simple meal protein to mend muscles and energy to wield hammer and tongs as the dawn grows brighter. Outside, winds stir a scattering of straw beneath the moss-covered roof. The stable hand approaches guiding horses to fresh water troughs. He fills a wooden bucket from a well nearby, each dip of the bucket sending ripples across still water. He calls softly to each steed, brushing manes as they bend to drink. With routine practiced by seasons, he readies harnesses and saddlebags for travelers who will soon carry fresh grain and parchments beyond the tavern's threshold. Inside, the smell of barley gruel mingles with rising bread, promising warmth and rest before burdens resume. A group of monks arrives, robes whispering against the floor. Each carries a simple satchel containing provisions for journey's end, loaves of bread, dried figs, and small vials of ointment. They pause at the door, offering reverent bows as the keeper holds it open. Their presence brings solace. Word travels quickly of a safe refuge in these walls. They kneel briefly before the hearth, touching forehead to stone before rising to accept bowls of porridge. They sip gently, sharing soft prayers as embers spark beneath the cook's warming hearth. As mid-morning approaches, the tavern's lull recedes and new symphonies begin. Wooden stools scrape benches as patrons shift shoes, scuffing against floorboards, and voices gather momentum. A scribe emerges from a hidden corner, quill in hand, recording yesterday's trades alongside dawn's renewed commerce, eggs exchanged for salt bread, traded for cinnamon, and whispered journeys planned beyond the next ridge. His ink flows steadily, capturing pledges that will guide travelers to courtyards hidden by sunrise's glare. By day's first bell, the tavern stands fully awake. The hearth's warmth embraces travelers once more, those arriving from distant towns, those departing for new horizons, and those content to linger in warmth before darkness calls again. The air vibrates with footfalls, tumbling coins, and low laughter, reminders that this place built of wood and fire serves not only ale and stew, but as a sanctuary where each dawn finds promise beneath smoke-stained rafters. Thus, as sun ascends, the tavern keeper tends hearth and ledger alike, unwavering in his stewardship of a place where journeys begin, friendships form, and every sunrise finds refuge under a single roof. As midday settles, the tavern's warmth deepens and voices rise in conversation. The hearth, stoked since dawn, now glows with steady embers, lending a soft orange glow that ripples across benches and tables. In this light, a merchant threads his way through clusters of patrons, each carrying parcels, sacks of grain, bolts of cloth, or small wooden chests sealed with wax. He pauses to inspect a bolt of indigo-dyed linen draped over a bench, running fingertips along its smooth weave. A weaver nearby leans forward, explaining that this batch came from a distant dyer, whose vats yield richer hues than most. Satisfied, the merchant claps a leather purse upon the table. The weaver lifts coins, then rolls the fabric carefully and tucks it beneath his arm, nodding in thanks before moving deeper into the hall. Not far behind, a pair of laborers emerge from the forge, faces and hands still streaked with soot. They approach the bar, resting thick arms on the wooden plank. The keeper nods to them and ladles bowls of thick porridge into unadorned wooden bowls. He sprinkles loose oats and a pinch of salt on top, then hands each bowl to a laborer. They carry their shares to a bench near the hearth, settling onto straw scattered across the floor. Spoonfuls of the warm meal chase away the chill of steel and coal, and their conversation drifts to the afternoon's plans, repairing a broken wheel for a merchant's cart, or forging a new hinge for the tavern's storeroom door. Service and craft intertwine here as each bowl of porridge offers fuel for the work still to come. A traveling minstrel enters as they eat lute slung low on his back. He moves toward a small platform beside the hearth, settling on a stool to tune strings. His calloused fingers pluck each string, drawing low, resonant notes that fill the hall with a hush. Patrons pause their chatter mugs lifted halfway to their lips. The minstrel begins a soft ballad voice, low and steady, recounting tales of distant kingdoms and fields of lavender. His words carry hope and longing, drawing nods from weary travelers and brightening the faces of village children who cluster at his feet. Coins clink softly into his hat coppers, tossed by those who recognize the power of melody to bind hearts. Beyond the sound of melody, the aroma of midday fare drifts in from the kitchen. The cook stokes coals beneath a large iron skillet, its surface blackened by countless meals. She pours a ladle of spiced oil into the pan, yielding a soft sizzle. She then adds strips of salted pork, their edges curling as they crisp to golden brown. Root vegetables follow, slender carrots snapped in half cubes of turnip and wedges of onion. Steam rises as she stirs, and a knob of butter melts, blending savory and sweet aromas. Patrons lean forward, drinking in the scent before hunger draws them to tables where bowls of walnut-sized stew await. A group of tanners arrives at the door shields of pressed leather strapped across broad chests. They make their way to the bar, each resting a fresh pelt on a bench to be examined by a trader who arrived at dawn. The trader assesses hides one by one, noting thickness and grain, then offers coin based on quality. When he encounters a flaw, an imperfect hairline scar, he negotiates a reduced price. The tanner shrugs, accepting that weather and beasts leave such marks. With a final shake of hands, the hides change hands, and the tanners depart, bound for the tannery outside town walls, where they will continue the craft of turning raw hides into supple leather. At a long table illuminated by the hearth's glow, a scholarly scribe pores over parchments. His quill scratches across a page, transcribing yesterday's events into a ledger of commerce and rumors. He notes that a traveling cloister donated eggs and linens to needy families, and that a knight pledged escort to merchants bound for the Eastern Fair. Each entry captures the ebb and flow of news, ensuring that when patrons return the next day, they can consult this record for guides, warnings, and alliances. The scribe pauses to dip his quill in ink, glancing up to record the sight of a grandmother leading her grandchildren into the hall. Each child's face alight with curiosity and hope. In a dim corner, a cloaked stranger who quietly negotiated at twilight washes the last traces of soot from his face. He splashes water onto his cheeks, using a chipped mug, then inspects a map spread across a stool. He traces finger along a dotted line, the path over the mountain pass that avoids bandit camps. He closes his eyes briefly, as though committing its turns to memory, then gathers the map into his satchel. He stands and nods to the keeper, whose closed eyes flicker open at the nod. The keeper pours a slowly filtered ale from a cask behind him and slides it across the bar. "Safe travels," he whispers, knowing that soon the stranger will disappear into the dust of the road map, as guide through hazards beyond these walls. A company of soldiers enters, their armor polished to a dull gleam in the tavern's half-light. They form a circle around a barrel used as an impromptu table. One grabs a handful of dice and rolls them across the scarred wood. The dice clatter to a stop, revealing a winning pair of sixes. Cheers erupt as coins slide across the barrel's edge, clinking as they jar their metal rims. The keeper watches closely, ensuring hard play remains within bounds. When tensions rise at a heated wager, he steps between the soldiers, offering a calm word and a gentle hand on a shoulder to divert any fight. He reminds them that strength lies in unity, not in blows struck inside these walls.
Mumbled apologies follow, and the dice cast anew bring a lighter mood. By mid-afternoon, the tavern's benches are crowded again with artisans and travelers seeking midday respite. A traveling apothecary returns carrying a fresh basket of dried herbs wrapped in linen. He sets it on a high shelf near the casks of ale and cider. From within he extracts a vial of lavender-infused oil to offer a weary widow whose husband works in the mill. He presses the vial into her hand with a soft smile, assuring her it will soothe stress and usher calm sleep. She bows, her dark eyes glistening with gratitude, then steps away to refill her bowl with stew and barley bread. At a low table near the hearth, two widows sit side by side, children now awake and playing quietly on the floor. One mother lifts a steaming bowl of stew to her lips, careful to blow away steam before sipping. Each spoonful fills her with warmth, and she nods to her companion, an unspoken bond of shared hardships. They trade solace in whispers, how rent demands will soon come due, and how yet another frost threatens the coming harvest. Each word carries both fear and resolve. Their children tug at their sleeves, craving morsels of sweet cake baked with saffron, gifted midday by the traveling spice merchant. The widows break a small piece for each child, offering laughter as nourishment of a different sort. Near the back door, a group of merchants prepare to depart. Saddlebags rest on the floor beside a sturdy mule loaded with bolts of linen bound for the far city. One merchant adjusts the straps, ensuring precious goods remain secure. Another gathers parchments contracts promising deliveries of grain next month in a weathered satchel. They nod to each other in silent acknowledgement this tavern has sheltered them, fed them, and granted rest to both man and mule. With final farewells, hands clasped, and promises exchanged, they move toward the door. The keeper, his voice steady, reminds them of a safer route through the mountain pass, pointing to a notch in a distant peak, visible through the narrow window. He assures them that in 2 days they will reach the next crossroads. They bless his kindness exit into the golden haze, and the door clicks softly behind them. As sunlight wanes and shadows lengthen, a hush of expectancy falls over the hall. The last apprentices finish their stew and push empty bowls aside, bows of thanks offered to the cook who stirs a pot of sweet elderberry porridge. A child lifts a spoonful to taste the fruity sweetness cheeks, puffing, as if he's discovered treasure rather than food. He smiles and offers a nod to the cook, an unspoken thank you that glows brighter than any coin. The cook pats a heavy wooden spoon lovingly, before setting it aside, knowing that soon this pot too will pour warmth into empty bowls. A traveling minstrel reemerges, lute in hand, to provide the final notes of afternoon before dusk. He settles on a bench near the hearth, immersing himself in chords that shift the tavern's mood from bustling commerce to gentle reflection. His ballad recounts tales of homesickness and return of families reunited after years spent seeking fortune. Patrons close their eyes, letting memories of distant hearths flicker like the embers in the hearth. Some wipe tears. Others tap toes in quiet recognition of longing that ties them together. Outside the door, a stable hand leads a pair of horses toward the fresh water trough. Each horse splashes eagerly, drinking deeply. The hand washes the trough's edge with a rag, mindful of ensuring clean water for any who arrive after dusk. He glances toward the tavern's windows where laughter and melody filter through. He smiles, knowing that these walls stand between the open road's dangers and each traveler's need for rest. In a moment of stillness, the tavern keeper steps forward to the bar. He counts coins once more, tallying the day's fare, the cost of grain ale and hearthwood. He sets aside a few coppers for tomorrow's supplies, oats for porridge, salt for curing meat, and a fresh cask of ale that must be tapped before evening's revel. He tucks a small pouch into his belt and breathes deeply, inhaling the mingled scents of wood smoke, stew, and spiced porridge. It is the fragrance of many lives coming together, each strand woven into an unbroken tapestry of respite and kinship.
As dusk's first violet hues gather beyond the windows, the tavern's quietude deepens into purpose. Flames in the hearth flicker brightly, illuminating faces bent toward the minstrel's final chorus. A mother lifts her child from the bench, placing the youngster on her hip. The child reaches toward the warmth, eyes wide as the minstrel's melody wraps the hall like a gentle embrace. The mother smiles, pressing the child's cheek against her shoulder, recalling a lullaby whispered at this very table months ago. On the floor nearby, a farmer kneels before a chestnut-skinned mule smoothing its coat. The mule nudges the farmer's shoulder, remembering the soft pat of grain-laden hands. The farmer stands dusting straw from his knees, then turns to the hearth to sip a final cup of ale. He closes his eyes, tasting malt and wood smoke, knowing that soon this tavern will fill once more with tales of harvest loss and fortune. He nods to the keeper, whose silent acknowledgement passes like a handshake. Before the last light dwindles, a traveling scholar leans across a table, offering a snippet of news. A new ruler has risen in a distant city, promising lower tolls on routes connecting far-flung villages. He spreads a parchment and traces a finger along a line, illustrating how travel times could shorten. A merchant nearby leans in, eyes bright with hope. A laborer nods, envisioning easier transport of goods. The scholar's words wings outward, carried by gossip and promise until they reach ears ready to listen. At length, night fully descends, and the tavern's flickering candles cast long shadows. Patrons drift away, some to the loft's straw pallets, others to the still crackling hearth for final whispers. The cook extinguishes the embers of her new stew pot, ensuring that no spark escapes to kindle mischief. The minstrel sets his lute aside, offering a curt bow before gathering coins, each one a testament to stories shared. The tinker rests his battered tools against a wall hook, planning tomorrow's repairs. The apothecary packs his vials, mindful of who will need salve at dawn's first light. Finally, the tavern keeper stands alone in the hush, gazing upon benches speckled with straw and the dim glow of lantern bulbs. He steps to the hearth, adding a last log to steady the flame, then leans against the bar, weary yet content. Beyond the shuttered windows, owls perch on branch and eaves, watching as embers cast gentle warmth within. The keeper breathes deeply, knowing that this shelter built of timbers and hearth fire holds both sanctuary and promise. In the quiet of night, he surveys the empty mugs and scattered coins, each relic of a day's worth of lives bound together under one roof. As he extinguishes the final lantern and locks the heavy door, the tavern stands ready to cradle another dawn, ready to fill again with laughter, melody, porridge, and the unspoken bond of those who seek warmth, rest, and the comforting murmur of kindred souls. Amen.